Well, what we're going to be talking about here is when we talk about coupling and cohesion, these are two principles in object-oriented design. So this is applicable really regardless of what programming language you're using, whether you're using C++ or Java or PHP. These principles are going to hold true. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is with coupling and cohesion, it's all about the relationships. So when we're talking about a software development, or when we're talking about a software application, the underlying architecture, the underlying foundation or design itself is going to determine how easy is it to maintain it, to be able to extend it, to be able to add additional functionality to it. And the first thing we'll take a look at is coupling. And with coupling, what it is it's the relationship between the different components. And one of the more popular architectures or frameworks that are out there it's called MVC, or Model View Control. It's a three-tier architecture that takes your presentation, which is your GUI, that you interact with, and then breaks it up into your business tier. You have all your business rules there, and then your data store on the back end. So, has anybody ever been to Home Depot, Lowe's, hardware store, right? So, So one of the things that I always use in describing coupling especially is, let's say you go down to the hardware store and you take a single link from a chain out of the bin. And let's say that link is maybe a 1/2 inch in diameter. So you got this metal link and you try to bend that. You think you're going to be able to bend that 1/2 inch in diameter metal link? Okay. Not unless you're one of the guys who tears the phone books in half, probably not. Or you need a tool, right? So that particular link is representative of a tightly coupled system. It's very inflexible, it's very rigid. From a software standpoint, we're going to be looking at code that has a lot of relationships between that presentation layer, the business layer, the data store, all kind of muddled together. So oftentimes you can tell when you're dealing with a tightly coupled system based on some of the symptoms of the system itself. If you go in and make a change, it has a seemingly unrelated side effect in the area of the system that you weren't expecting, and that's because there's a really tight relationship between those. So what you want to do is you want to build flexibility into that system. So if we take our single link in a chain analogy and we go and pull 2 more links and link those together, now by separating those responsibilities, just like in a software system, we get flexibility. We get some movement within that overall system. So how this figures into learning is if you look at traditional models, where you go in and the instructor provides the instruction, everybody takes the notes, they go home, do their homework, come back with their assignment, turn it in the instructor. It's a very linear type of process. So what we want to be able to do is provide flexibility in learning. And if you want to learn something today, what are some of the options available?
Books, internet, television, video, other stuff, but
Okay.
unlimited nowadays. You can access almost any type of.
Right. So if you look at the traditional model, okay, our universities, for example, are still using that instructor-based type of approach. K through 12 is actually adopting what's called the flipped classroom. Are you familiar with that? Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But really what it comes down to is our education system is kind of based on a one-size-fits-all. It doesn't matter what your learning style is, you're going to go in and you're going to have the same experience as somebody, the other 30, 40 people, however many are in that classroom. Now, from an instructor standpoint, it's often difficult when you have a classroom with varying degrees of learning styles and experience, because oftentimes you're going to have students that aren't keeping up with the pace of the class. You have the majority that are right on track. You have some that are exceeding, and it's very difficult to be able to gauge that and be able to adjust that. Exactly.
The frustration my kids had, they were way above, district levels, and like my daughter, she didn't want to take honors class. And then I found out part of the teaching degree, you have to take classes for disabled children. And so we were talking one afternoon, and she told me that, don't worry about your daughter not doing honors class. She goes, "I'm not learning anything. All they're doing is giving them more homework at the same level." And I thought the honors meant they were getting college level instruction. They weren't. I was like, what's the point? You're just stressing these children out. So I was like, really, I'm so glad you told me this, because I didn't know. So I got off her case about not being in the honors program. But they always were smart like that. They still are. So.
And it's based on the theme.
I made my point.
That's okay. So once again, in those situations, you've got that one size fits all. It doesn't.
No, it's really
It's very inflexible. It's very rigid. You either adapt to the style, or you fall behind, or you find a different option. Well, today with technology, it's more of a utility-based type of function, as far as our education is concerned. We can customize our own learning paths. We don't have to be bound, by a particular curriculum. If we want to learn about calculus, we can figure out how to go and learn about calculus. We can learn about programming and databases. Pretty much anything that you can think of, we have that accessibility now. So let's think about how we go about consuming software. Okay, 5 years ago, how did we go about installing software?
You get a CD or a DVD.
Right, you get the CD, you go down to Staples or wherever, or you download it, you install this software on your computer, and you're off and running.
No.
But, well, if it works correctly. But oftentimes what happens is those applications, studies have shown that, like Microsoft Office, for example, there's only about 14% of the functionality actually gets used by the majority of people. So that means that 86% of what you purchased is never going to be touched. You're not going to use it. Now, if you think about how we consume software today, okay, we've got all these little smartphones and these tablets where we're downloading all of these apps. So rather than going out and dropping 300 or 400 bones for an application, now you're paying 99 cents, $2.99, $4.99. It's a much more granular type of approach. So if we go back to that concept of coupling, rather than if you want to build flexibility in the system, you want to be able to have in object-oriented design reusable components that you can transfer to different applications. So you want to have very well-defined software components, highly cohesive, so that we can take these and use them in different applications. We can configure an application based on these small components. If we try to have a piece of software that does all things for all people, we start introducing that inflexibility again.
There requires a definition of infrastructure that all those different objects can plug into and work together.
Absolutely.
It isn't mandated, but you have to define that. It has to be well defined and understood for everyone building it.
Absolutely. And that's why within Agile, one of the principles is the focus on technical excellence. And that technical excellence is based on design, which my opinion is that's one of the areas of software development that we really aren't real disciplined in today. We have a tendency not to focus on design to interfaces, design by contract. Instead, we get into the implementation side of things.
The build, not the time in architecture. I counsel my partners all the time about that.
Yeah.
And the management trainings I've worked with them, because I was trained to think that at least 40% of the time in building a product should be in the design side. Because if you design it properly, then you have longevity, maintainability, sustainability, and good working stable code.
Right. Exactly. And if you think about it from apply it to the construction of a structure or a building, right? What's the most important part? The foundation. The same thing applies in software. The same thing applies in our education as well. Our foundational understanding and our foundational learning is going to determine how successful we are in the future. If we have a weak foundation, math. I've got 4 kids, 2 daughters. Our youngest daughter right now is just kind of struggling with math. That's never been her strong point. But we've always encouraged her, stay focused on the math, because what it does is it provides you options. There's too many of our girls that are, getting out of the STEM fields, getting out of the mathematics, even in 5th, 6th grade, And in doing so, they're really closing some doors before they even get out of high school. What's that?
Not rock. She's doing that. Put on classes for music
Oh,
and see what happens.
yeah.
So you just
No,
give it a try.
we're experimenting with all kinds of things.
She's a try.
Yeah.
So, well, there's studies proving that children who play instruments do better in school. It opens up different areas of the brain.
Yeah.
And then when you're listening to music and you're reading or whatever, you get what I find is I relax. So she's all tense. She can't focus. Just put some music on. Rock might just distract her too much, depending on her age. But just nice classic music, find something she likes, and she'll be like, cool. And then it won't be this stress-filled environment. It takes that stress out. And it might just work.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I found too is I know a lot of developers that they can put the headphones in, it doesn't matter what they're listening to, and they can code. My mind doesn't work like that. I'm not that type of multitasker. But
Are you a musician?
pardon me?
Do you play any instrument?
I used to.
I have a musical background, so depending on the music, I'll start listening to the chord progressions and things like that. So there's only certain music I can listen to while I'm working in detail.
Some
If
stuff.
I'm writing something, I usually go quiet.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can listen.
If there's any type of music that has lyrics, I can't do it. Because if I'm trying to type something out and I'm listening to the lyrics and the words, it's confusing for me. If it's something that's more instrumental, then I can do it. And I'm the same way. If I'm writing something, it has to be quiet. But yeah, it's interesting how everybody kind of goes about, that learning. And if you look at the different learning styles, there's three main learning styles that each one of us possess. There's the auditory learner, the visual learner, and the kinesthetic. I'm a very poor auditory learner. I can't just read something or listen to somebody. But if I see it and I do it, that's where my learning really locks in. And that's one of the challenges that we face in instruction and that teachers face is, once again, recognizing that, one, there are different learning styles. Whether you're dealing with kids or adults, you have those same learning styles that you have to deal with. Some kids, struggle in that auditory side. But the hands-on cutting the paper and everything else, they could really excel at that. And this is where our education system has to be more flexible and not try to impose this one-size-fits-all type of system on these, on any of us, because we have those different learning styles.
I come across that in so many different applications. When I apply for jobs, I've applied to so many different places, and they all have a different system for their online applications. And my issue is the inflexibility. If you go one page ahead, you can't go back. Or like the one I was just applying for, it's a new store here in town. But the thing was, I had to fill out every single area. It wouldn't let me advance and save. And I'm hoping that can change too. But that, like you're saying, that inflexibility, it's there in so many corporations still. It'd be nice if they changed their software where the applicant can do parts of the application and come back. There was no save. You had to finish the page and then save and then move on. And I find that really, I don't know what it's called, but it's really frustrating.
Yeah.
I was reading something last year that they determined that in terms of memory and retention, it's much better if you can combine all three senses.
Yep.
So visual, auditory, and tactile as well.
Yep.
And so that you actually, it imprints better in your mind than if you have all four senses stimulated simultaneously.
Yeah.
Just retention-wise.
Yep. Yeah, because if you can explain it, show them, and then have them do it, that's that all-encompassing, and it hits on each one of those styles. But once again, there has to be an awareness on the part of whoever's delivering the training and the instruction that you're dealing with those multiple components. And each person, I'm very high on the kinesthetic and the visual, but very low on the auditory. Somebody else could be just the opposite. So developing your content and being able to provide the instruction that hits on all three of those, is very challenging. And when it comes back to that coupling and that cohesion, it's like that, those links in the chain. If you have a single system that says this, or a single program or curriculum that says this is what we have to work with, then you're not really providing good instruction, good education to whoever that audience is. It needs to be able to be customized and be able to be formatted in a way that it addresses, each one of those styles.
Well, our classroom model is not now to adapt to the speeds at which kids can absorb data
Right.
and teach it. So, and because they don't have appropriate feedback mechanisms in place, so I can tell if Kevin's progressing at this rate and Bob's progressing at this rate, what's not working in that style, and how do we augment how the material is presented
Right.
to Bob,
Yep.
so that he catches up with Kevin, or does he need to? What is his skill set such that this is the level he's going to be at for now?
Right.
We don't have those processes in place that adapt the teaching model to the students' capabilities, and also some teaching methods just don't work with some students. Some teachers just don't work with some students.
That's true.
And so
Whatever.
recognizing that and adapting that early and often is not at all in our system today.
Right. Well, that's just it. That's why I get really excited, because if you look at Agile, what you were just talking about is early and often. It's iterations. It's being able to put something in place, try it, get feedback, and then improve it. But what we have right now is basically, we're going to put it in place, and then we're just going to push people through, regardless. There's that feedback loop and that feedback mechanism.
It's without doing the appropriate assessment, just literally pushing people through. And when things break, not addressing it.
Right.
When there is an issue, it's so often not addressed. I mean, I don't want to divert this, but there was a bullying issue. My daughter was in the 5th grade. The boy was harassing her. They took her to counseling. They didn't say anything again.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not the problem.
Kind of fast backwards.
Yeah.
So my daughter has the same problem. The boy was bothering her. And I said, I want you to do this first before I step in. She's a junior. She was a junior that year. I wanted her to confront the kid. And I didn't realize maybe she just, it was too much. I said, talk to the teacher, please, before I just step in and do this battle for you. Because I just felt that if I do it for her, she'd never learn. She'd, always expect me to fight her battles. It's like, you got to stand up for yourself. And she didn't want to do that. And I was like, and I decided not to step in. Maybe I'm thinking, maybe I should have just went to the school and said, hey, look, this is going on. My daughter's got these issues. I don't know if I did the right thing. But I know there's the same deal, is that it didn't get addressed.
The school's response was, though, not to address the issue.
Yes.
It truly was.
And maybe it could be
This child moved away, or I think we would have had to get more engaged as parents in that regard.
Yeah.
But they didn't address the problem with the real problem.
Right.
It happens a lot.
So, Kevin, what do you think in terms of modifying how things are done? Because I agree wholeheartedly. If you look at how some of the schools are leveraging Khan Academy
Yep.
to change their teaching models, that gives the kids the opportunity to progress more at their own rate with the teacher working then individually with the kids that are having issues.
Right.
Then you can immediately discern, are they testing through?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a key point, because the Khan Academy is based on, that was the creation of that flipped classroom model. And the flipped classroom, what that's going to do is, rather than having the instructor, give the same presentation year after year, lesson after lesson, the same thing, instead they produce that on video, make it available to the students so that they have a self-paced component. And what this does is, rather than having all the students in the classroom hearing the material for the first time, if you have that student that is kind of falling behind and they need to have the repetition, like that's me. I need to reread things a couple of times for the retention. But in a classroom setting, your instructor is not going to go back and try to pick up the slow ones in the herd, per se. And for those that are exceeding beyond that, okay, they have to sit there and they're bored out of their minds because the pace is not there. So by putting all of that content in a video base, what it does is it empowers the student to go back and basically review that content at their own pace. For that, for those students that already know the material, and rather than being bored, they can skim it, right? For those that need to have the repetition, they can go back and listen to that lecture however many times that they want. The benefit is when that group comes together and works on the kinesthetic side of things, the application of those concepts, then the teacher assumes the role of more of a facilitator and a guide to help the collaboration process, to be able to work with individuals on the application of it. So you've normalized the understanding, at a higher level. Because when those kids or the adults come in, they've already been exposed to that material. And if they've had to go through it 2 or 3 times, great. If that's what's required for their retention, then they're coming in with a higher level understanding of that topic. So now we're going to take the concepts and the theory and we're going to apply it. And I think that's really what needs to change. Introducing that into the K through 12 and higher education, it's been attempted, but there's been some teachers have just totally embraced it and they've, tried to run with it. There are others that are very reluctant to do that, because what that means is there's more onus on the teacher to be doing that production aspect of it. But the thing of it is, you gain the efficiencies in the long term. In the short term, does it take more time? Absolutely. But rather than having to duplicate and go through the same lesson year after year, that's now available, that you've got an asset available that you can give to the students, allowing the teacher to be freed up to be working on, maybe there is somebody that needs a little bit more time. Well, now they have that ability to do that, because the rest of the students, once again, they're acting more as the facilitator and not necessarily the driver for that. It's a much more empowering type of model.
The other potential opportunity, this is something I presented a few years ago I was talking with Bruce Whitehead at Middle School. Because today, teachers they build a lesson plan, and you look at all the schools across the United States, how many lessons plans are built every year over and over and over again. Right. They've only been built before.
It's a lot of work too. It's a daunting task.
So if that was harvested though, so you could pick the best 10 lesson plans that are built in the country and shared, so that instead of me building a lesson plan in the Civil War or War of 1812 or whatever, I can grab the best one that's ever been done in the last 10 years and pull it in, and then tailor it if I want. But all that starting point to begin with, just database, you just extract it.
Yeah.
And then because that becomes a shared resource, it's like open source, right? It's the whole concept of open source. Yep. And it doesn't exist today.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a very interesting point that you bring up as well, because once again, if you look at the, picking the best, because, for people who don't know me, they may think that I'm being very harsh of our education system, which the system itself I am. I'm very pro good teacher. I'm very against bad education, bad schools, because there are great teachers, whether it's K through 12 or in college. My goal eventually with our business is be able to cherry pick the absolute best instructors and give them the environment, the tools, the education that they need to be able to, there's some amazing things that they're doing currently, some teachers. Let's be able to take them and raise those up as the examples and say, this is what we expect. And everybody else now has, something to shoot for. There is a goal that can be established if you raise that up. It's a merit-based system.
Well, exactly. If it's done properly, then there's a reward process also attached to that. So if your lesson plans are coming to the top and used repeatedly, then you're recognized as a higher contributor, as more valuable, just like any corporate organization. And so you're compensated both through recognitions and monetarily, because your lesson plans are being used repeatedly. And if we just had that sharing process in place to begin with. And then the other piece of that too is like what I really resonate with this instructor but not this instructor. Covering the same material, just a little different method of presentation.
Right.
This voice timbre, etc. resonates with me. You can have multiple plans like that. So you have 2 students side by side using the same lesson plan from different teachers at the same time. So not only can you progress at your rate, you can have different presentation models and methods in place, and still be in the same class, whether it's in the same room or virtually.
Yeah. Because that's just it. The message is the same, but the messenger is just as important. Because I've had some brilliant instructors, but they were very poor teachers. Because you may have the knowledge, you may be absolutely brilliant, but if you cannot communicate and convey that topic such that you impart knowledge on the audience, then you're really not, you're really not doing the students that great of a service. The same thing happens, in our industry. We've got some people that are absolutely brilliant that also have the ego. Okay, those are folks that, they're not necessarily going to be the best team member, because you can have all the knowledge, but if you're not willing to share it, or if you have the inability to communicate it to others so that you're raising everybody's capabilities, which in turn, promotes the goal.
You have a caustic presentation model. I mean, in a team environment, that can be tremendously detrimental.
Yeah.
Same thing in the classroom, though, in terms of what teacher resonates with what student. I mean, there's an instructor at Elgate that my son just
kind of a no-man's land.
He did not resonate with that teacher. He could
Yeah.
not learn from her. Other people did.
Yeah.
Many people did not. So, but you're kind of stuck because it's 32 kids in a classroom getting algebra 2.
Right. Yeah. And that's where I think that whole idea of the flexibility in the system comes into play. And the first thing is just, the recognition on the part of the educators that we've got, different needs all contained in the same audience. And how can we take the same message but be able to change it, in a way that it resonates, with those different audience members.
And then people are like, how can we fix this and how you fix that? Smaller classroom size. A lot of teachers also have said that over the years. I've got this many kids and I've got that many kids, and it's like, but that's what you signed up for. It's not that hard. I know you have a lot of kids, but in a way it sounds like they're just an excuse not to be better. An excuse to, well, they're all failing, so I can justify that my students are failing. No, you're hired to do a job. It comes down to, why don't they want to do that job anymore? Are they stuck themselves? But I come back to the idea of one good helpful thing would be smaller schools. Because some of these schools, oh my gosh, they're colossal. The high schools. I think Hellgate's big. I know you guys probably been around the country. Holy moly, some of these schools, like down in the Gilbert District in Arizona, these schools are huge. It'll take you hours to go through them all. And there's that disconnect. They're too big. There's too many kids. And I'm thinking smaller kids, not smaller kids, but smaller classrooms, smaller schools, divvy up
K
classrooms.
through 12, directly to Kevin's point, a few decades ago, it was consistent that typically classes were leveled so that you had common learning skills to build, and that has pros and cons in terms of segmentation, in terms of reading, mathematics, and science. When you have a kid that's performing at a third grade level and a kid that's performing at a sixth grade level in the same class, and you're teaching at a fourth, fifth grade level, you're using the both. So this is something that's tremendously growing in our current system.
And that's where I think, it needs to, there needs to be a fundamental change in the way that we go about addressing the individual needs, not the collective needs, because that's really the system that we have in place now, is we have this system, we're just going to funnel them through. And we've seen situations too where rather than, there's a stigma now associated with, if there's a child that is not cutting the grade, they'll just push them through to the next grade rather than actually holding them back. And I think that's doing a disservice, not only to the child, but also just kind of a society in general. Because what are you saying? Once again, it's a matter of you've just been designated a commodity, and the quality, it doesn't really matter. It's the quantity. And if you look at, for example, here in Montana, you look at the number of colleges and universities that we have, and what we've created through the Board of Regents is we've got a competitive environment because part of their funding is based on enrollment. So what's happened over the course of the last 20 years? Well, what we see is a lot of duplication of programs in different universities and colleges, because if they can pull students into those programs, that means that they have a larger amount of funding. It's a self-destructive system, because now, you're duplicating facilities, you're duplicating faculty, you're duplicating all of the components that go into all of these different programs. I mean, computer science is at, I think, probably every college and university in the state of Montana. Why, is my question. Because you look at the way that we can teach now, and through the technology, especially in a rural state, having any type of technology, if there's any place that technology could come into play to really gain efficiencies, it's in our rural states. You look at Montana and Wyoming and the Dakotas, Idaho, where we've got, less than 1 million people. Maybe we're at 1 million now. Fourth largest state in the union, right? But we have all of this duplication of facilities and all of this money that's going into the education system. Has it increased the quality? I mean, every year we keep hearing about the tuition rates are going up. Does that mean that the quality? Because I'm fine. If I want to pay a premium and I'm getting a premium service, that's one thing. But I don't think that's where we're at right now, because we've talked to a lot of business owners and they're not necessarily satisfied with the quality of the graduates that are coming out. One, we're not churning out enough graduates, and then secondly, there's a quality issue, the skill set.
Sets that are coming out, but it's a whole different can of worms to open up. When you talk K-12, it's a different dance on these new place. When you talk college and careers and preparation,
It is different.
It's a validation process that's appropriate in terms of method of access. But secondly, it's the quality of the career that a student pays for a specific borrow $100,000 to $200,000 to come out with a career. And you don't realize that the degree that you can give has no viability in terms of getting a job.
Right.
An 18-year-old doesn't even know how to assess that to begin to.
I don't think they do.
And
They
so
still need parents.
this is something that I don't know how we can address it as a country. If we're talking about just Montana, so you look at MSU
And then when they experience it for
2-year schools,
they start
That are being introduced.
and more than
about
being
here,
used.
they're feeling like they're not liking this at all.
There's not a strong linkage between the quality of educations that are being provided and the opportunities in many instances. I think my son ended up in MSU, so we paid very close attention to what they're doing, especially their engineering schools. That's where he's at right now.
They just got a big cash injection.
They did. My daughter-in-law very happy. She's a professor. She just started second year now? Yeah. Second. So yeah, they're happy.
Their models are different than what we see here in terms of how they quantify the opportunities for students. Like the engineering students, they almost 100% placement for their graduates.
And I think one of the things that I'd like to see is, one, we've been conditioned as a society that the path to success is through college. And that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of successful stories out there where people did not have their degrees. I think it's important to have that as a viable option at some point in the future. But I totally agree. When I went to school at 18 years old, I thought I was going to be an architect. Well, now 24 years later, I've taken a much different path, and it only took me 2 quarters to find out that, okay, my mind's not hooked up as an architect. But what I see happening now, there was an article in the Bozeman Chronicle 2 or 3 years ago, and they were touting how MSU, leads the state in graduation rate at 49%. And when I heard that statistic, the first thing I thought of was, well, what about the other 51% that didn't get the degree? Because I can guarantee that most of them probably went through at least their freshman year, and they probably incurred some debt in the process. If they've gone anywhere beyond that, they've probably got even more debt. But they don't have the benefit of the degree to allow them to garner a higher wage to be able to pay those loans off. So they've been saddled, with this debt. As an 18-year-old, like I said, like you said, and I agree, very few 18-year-olds necessarily know what they want to do with the rest of their lives. So what we want to do through our, efforts is to be able to provide an alternative. Somebody comes out of school, 18 years old, let's get them some skills that are actually needed by employers, and let's teach them how to put money into their checking account before they start incurring a bunch of debt for a degree program that may or may not actually be of benefit when they get through that 4 or 5 years. This especially applies to technology, because if you look at the pace of technology and how it changes in a 4 or 5 year span of time, based on Moore's law, you could have technology, turn over at least twice, if not 3 times during that period of time. And, that 18 to 24 month window that Moore's law states, I feel it creeping back. It's no longer 18 months. It seems like that pace of technology and how it's changing, it's increasing and not decreasing.
Change. Look at the infrastructure underneath. It's not moving near as fast as the software applications.
Right.
Things implemented with tech.
Lord, that is true.
bits and bytes and the infrastructure. And the education that I got in graduating in 87, still every day. And that infrastructure still applies, and that's the base on which I've learned a tremendous amount. And it is evolving. Networking.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at 4 years to 8 years of networking, it's completely different. So if you're counting on that same hardware, that same infrastructure, and the protocols,
Right.
ECI at the bottom. HTML5. I mean, you have to keep pace with that tech.
Well, the way I put it is,
So, I mean, starting out with a 2-year program that's maybe a bit of skill oriented along with the basis, and then so you got an agile work towards sprint, right? But you're looking for a product definition in your product backlog and your sprint backlog, so what you ship is working that's viable in the market at the end of that cycle. Look at your education system the same way, so that you had 1, 2, 3, 4, at the end of the first year you have viable skills. Second year more so, third year. We haven't set up for a 4-year degree, so if you don't make 4 years, you're just out. Because you got 2 years and a semester in, but you didn't finish the last semester, you don't have your degree.
Well, and one of the things that we've thought about is, if you think back to the trades, the electricians and the plumbers and such, what do they have? They've got apprentices. Why don't we apply that in technology? Where you can take an individual, a student, whether they're, just coming out of high school or maybe it's somebody who's doing a career change, partner them with a senior, type of developer and allow them the opportunity not only to learn the theory, but more importantly, how it's actually applied and actually be able to produce. And rather than taking a public speaking class or a public writing class, actually get them into an environment that's a tangible and realistic type of environment. Run them through Agile, how a project actually functions, how do they interact with their teammates, the daily stand-ups. If you want to talk about public speaking, give them some context of what this is going to be applied
That's
to.
what I do with my teams, right? I bring in a junior programmer, and then they're partnered with a senior programmer, systems analyst, right? And so they're giving incremental projects, but also I always support, they present. And they're working with the customer directly. We grow people that way, so by the time they are a senior analyst, they can sit down with a client, understand what needs to be built, and then work with the team to get it there.
And what you're doing there is you're giving them that opportunity for the application of what, that foundational understanding. Because if I look back on my computer science degree and I distill it down into, after being in industry for 15 years, what are the things that I really, really needed and what are the things that didn't necessarily have direct application? And being able to condense that down, so even from a 2-year perspective, being able to provide an alternative where you focus on what is the current needs in industry with the employers, distilled, information structures, data structures, protocols, syntax for different languages. Syntax is not something that you should be focusing on. You should be focusing on, just like in Agile, values and principles. What are good design strategies? Absolutely, it's that foundation.
I had a big argument the other day about calculus. Is calculus required for a semester? And I say yes. If you don't have that basis in math and problem solving, that's what you learn in mathematics. So my degree had a built-in mind map, and a lot of people didn't get through calculus differential equations to get to you're taking along with your programming class. And I don't know. What do you think about it? Is that required for the foundation? That level of
I think it depends. I think it totally depends upon the individual, because 2 of the best programmers that I ever worked with was a physicist and a biologist. They didn't even have formal computer science backgrounds, but they had the logical minds that they understood the process and they understood how to implement and have a logical approach to it. So I think one of the things that employers, anytime that I see job postings and they say, minimum requirements, bachelor's in computer science, preferably a master's. I don't put any stake into that anymore, because I look at what are the, just because you have a master's degree doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a good employee, right? I'd much rather be focusing on what are the we hire for character, not for skills. Skills can be taught. And that's one of the things, especially in technology, you have to have a mindset of continual learning, because if you decide that, I'm going to be the best COBOL programmer, guess what? Your opportunities are few and far between today if you made that decision 20 years ago. Skills, once again, can be taught, but I can't teach you how to be honest. I can't teach you what integrity is. I can't tell you how to have a good work ethic. Those are things that are, going back to Lisa's talk yesterday, those are ancestral. Those are family. Those are things that are, should be addressed early on in development. And those are things that, as employers, I don't want to have to deal with, okay, I've got somebody that lies, I have somebody that's lazy. Okay? Those are things that I don't need to be wasting my time on. I'd much rather be investing in a person that shows me that they take initiative, that they want to learn, that they are hard workers, then you know what? I'm going to invest my time and money into giving them the skills so that they have professional development opportunities that in turn, have benefits to the company as well. But I think once again it comes back down to that foundation. I think there's a lot of different ways that foundation can be approached, and it requires different thinking. And I think we've gotten conditioned to the point where we're just willing to, I shouldn't say we, the education system has accepted the status quo. And I think there are a lot of different, factors, that figure into that. But I also know that there are individuals within those environments that are doing extraordinary things. And that's really where I see the opportunity to be able to, provide a different mechanism, a different way of educating that not only meet the individual's unique needs, but also meet needs of, what we need from a societal perspective as well. We've got a deficit in STEM positions right now. There's not enough, in the science, technology, education, and mathematics. And we need to be thinking about how do we address that problem. We already know that there's a problem, so what are the solutions out there?
We have to move away from teaching to the lowest common denominator.
Absolutely.
I don't mean that in a cold way, but just truthfully.
Right.
Because, like I said before, if you're teaching and you're and you disenfranchise everyone to talk.
Right.
And so by not recognizing that and giving people, I started a robotics club in my kids' middle school because there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. So I had to go to the school board, convince them to let me do this. And then 2 years later, finally they funded it. And it became, one of the first program in Missoula was in Hellgate because I started.
And I think that's what's required is oftentimes, we, depending on the environment that we're in, and I think we're all susceptible to this. We deal with the same issues day in, day out. We get focused on the tree in front of our face and we lose sight of the forest. And oftentimes what that requires is, I had a conversation with Greg Gianforte back in the fall. And he said, the companies that are truly going to be successful in the future are going to be the ones that have that disruptive innovation. They're going to be doing things differently. And I think oftentimes we have to kind of break those comfort zones that we all get associated with. And sometimes that just requires a different perspective. So you introducing a new topic and actually having a passion about it and being able to implement it, that, you affected a change. Now they've got, a program in place that otherwise wouldn't be there. And I think what we need to do is probably have just a higher level of engagement, especially between the private sector and the public. And I think we have to move, even in our higher education, the tenure process I absolutely hate, because I think what it does is it instills that mediocrity. Instead of focusing on the student and what you should be doing, instead you're focusing on, the instructors and the professors.
It gets back to the quality of education in our university systems today. I have an employee, and she took 7% of the classes for an instructor.
I use this as a
She's a master's student TA.
Yeah.
She was in the class 7% of the time versus the instructor was in the class 3%.
Right.
This is what
Yeah. Well,
she did what she was told.
right.
You have to have teaching experience before they get to but she wasn't doing that,
This is a
was she?
master's degree CS person. She's not a teacher.
Right.
She's a
she-
TA. She's a teacher's assistant because they have to do so much
Right.
If they're
work
getting
with
a
the
degree,
professor and two for their degree, for their master's for their thesis.
Yeah, and see, I went to two schools here in Montana. I started out at Montana State, and then I finished up my degree at School of Mines in Butte. And MSU, you're competing. You have 11, 12,000 students. When I went up to Tech, there were like 2,000. Well, what it did, you go back to your question about the smaller classrooms. And that actually has an effect because I felt like I had a higher quality education because I had that interaction and my instructors knew who I was. It was a matter of a class, in my junior, senior year of, 8 to 10 students versus 30 or 40. And it just, it allowed for, a higher quality and more quantity, of that communication. So I think that's absolutely, a factor as well, is being able to have those smaller classrooms. And, when we teach and instruct for adults, we try to cap our classes at 12, because for an instructor to start segmenting beyond that, it really becomes difficult, and it affects the overall quality. If we go above 12 students, we'll have two instructors in there, just to ensure that the quality.
There's classes too, a pre-qualification in terms of we have these 12 students, they have this background in their class. And what happens in the education system is don't necessarily.
Right. And I think that's where applying Agile principles, that repeatability and that delivering, often times can you can incorporate more of the assessment side of things, and not disqualify somebody, for the next year. Okay, you're not ready. But instead, if you have those smaller iterations where you present the topic, you assess at the end, and identify, and what it does is it gives you the opportunity with that feedback to make adjustments. It's kind of like, with in the military, they've got sniper teams. Okay, you've got one that's a marksman, you've got another one that's a spotter, and the spotter is basically feeding information, to the shooter to say, okay, am I on target or not, and making the appropriate adjustments. Well, what do we do in Agile? Okay, every 2, 3, 4 weeks, we take a shot at what the client wants, we get it in front of them, we get their feedback. So they're our spotter, they're giving us that feedback. The same thing can be applied in the schools. Being able to get that feedback on a more frequent basis. Those are the type of things that, trying to put that into an organizational structure that's not accustomed, to, I think, actually addressing, the assessment side of it.
You can automate those tools, but today you can't.
Sure.
That assessment process should be 100% automated, so the teacher at any point in time can click a button and see exactly where every student under her purview or his purview is at,
Yeah.
and how they're progressing, and where they're having difficulty. And the tools to do that autonomous assessment are out there today, and they're free in many cases, but they're not being adapted and applied to the teaching.
Well, and I think just the having 4 kids that have gone through the public education system as well, and when it comes down to the technology, a lot of times the kids are outpacing their teachers, and I think that's one of the things that needs to be addressed as well. One of the things that we've talked about doing at IQ is being able to identify, once again based on a merit type of system, identify a teacher that is doing something or wants to do something that utilizes technology or does something in a different way, be able to identify them and say, hey, you know what, you have earned, here's some training that we have available that will help you go back into the classroom and take your ideas that you've been doing and improve, upon them. And I don't know what the reaction would be, because once again, that merit system, it seems to be kind of an oxymoron when it comes to the environment. I don't know if my personal opinion is I think it'd be viewed as a threat, by others, because you're.
The K through 12 teachers used to this. My children, there was an 8th grade science teacher that was just, everyone knew for a decade this person should not be teaching, but that person would take. So we actually had to go in because there was a situation where it was just obviously an unfair grade wrong, and it was blatantly obvious. And we as parents had to go in and make the principal aware of the fact, and then they it's just a situation where this person shouldn't be in a position.
Let's say we put aside, we have 70.
Well, and you being the parent, how many other parents or how many other kids may have been subjected to that same unfair grading? Right. Because that's and this is where it comes back to that personal responsibility, because I think there's a lot of apathy within the parents as well. And for those that are, going in and having those conversations, oftentimes I think we get tagged as, okay, here comes McManus again, or here comes Bob again and his wife. because I mean, we've experienced that, because obviously, you know, we value education. You know, our business is about educating beyond, you know, beyond school and into the careers, and it's important for our kids. So we take a vested interest, and if they're getting screwed, you know what? Mama Bear and Papa Bear are going to be in there, and they're going to be, you know, making sure that things get fixed. But I think that's the exception, unfortunately. And I think that's where, you know, once again, we need to be able to, you know, help those teachers, help those administrators that are truly vested. Because, like we have our youngest at Hellgate Elementary. Love that school. I mean, what we've seen so far this year, they invest in the technology. They've got great teachers. It seems like the administrators are on top of things. I think that's an example, and I think it's good to raise those examples up for other people to elevate themselves to. But we got some fundamental structural issues that I think we need to deal with in that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it comes down to recognizing that the way that we learn today is different, and the technology has enabled, you know, a customization that we've never had before. Automation, you know, the assessment side of things, all of those things are providing data. And we should be making our decisions based off of data, not based off of necessarily history, tradition, or emotion. And when it's hard to argue facts. And once again, we've got a lot of
Graduation rates and the lack of education.
yeah.
Something needs to be done, but I think it's going to be left up to
Yeah, it is.
the private sector to come back in and
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, it's going to require some changes in the mindset, because we've approached some of the colleges, and, you know, as far as like a partnership, how can we, you know, support you? How can you support us? How can we work together? And oftentimes we find that, you know, they kind of look at us like, why are you here? And it's kind of a territorial thing. It's a threat. And it's like, wait a second, we're focusing on the wrong things if you're viewing us as a threat, because ultimately what this should be about is, you know, who is the audience for our education, whether it's K through 12 or you know, higher ed or professional development. We should be ensuring that we're imparting that knowledge and providing that quality, you know, to our consumer, you know, which is going to be the student. What's that?
Good session.
Good. Yeah, thanks for participating.
Well, now that you're here, we're going to start.
All right, good.
Okay.
Glad you waited for me.
Well, I knew you were coming.
Yeah.
So my name's Woody Zool, and this talks about mob programming. And mob programming is something I consider to be a whole team approach. So I'm sharing it with you here today. Harold asked me to come to Mach 1, and this is one of the things that I've shared at several conferences that he's been to, and I think it's an idea that he finds particularly fun. I wanted to make sure I had a chance to present it here. So I've got a story to tell, and I think of this as being about the most important thing. And usually I have enough time to get all the way to the end and cover the most important thing. But what I found after giving this talk a number of times is however many people are there, there's at least that many most important things about this talk. So I've learned that I can learn more about what's the most important thing from the people who came than what I thought was the most important thing. But I really like to start with this, and I love this slide, and I want to give my wife credit for most of the pictures that I use. The drawings are from her. And she does a lot of drawings.
Great drawings, by the
She's a
way.
great artist. And she does, a lot of these are just for her own fun, little story ideas she has, but some of them are for storybooks that she's working on for people, and also that she's written. And I just loved this one. This is sort of about a kid. I have no idea what the story would be, but the kid is sort of wants to be a rabbit, and he's reading a book about rabbits to some rabbits. It's just like a circle of wonderfulness going on here. But let's go on. So mob programming is all the brilliant minds working on the same thing at the same time in the same space, which is what I think of Agile software development. Agile software development is breaking down the barriers of communication that come in if we spread things out over time or if we spread things out across space. And so as long as we're working on the same thing at the same time, same space, that's pretty close to whatever Agile sort of is. But we add into it on the same computer. So that's what makes mob programming a bit different. We're going to talk about it, and most of the questions that people usually ask will get answered through the talk. And there's one I haven't added in yet, and I'll mention that one shortly. So I'll probably cover all the questions you might have. So this is what it looks like from the front. There's about 8 of us there. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of us. And you notice we have a regular kind of a task board area. We work in sort of a Kanban style. We have, but this is our work area. We have a computer, which is represented right there. I don't know if that comes in on a camera. And we got 2 monitors that project. And we have actually 2 keyboards, but we'll talk about that in a minute. We only input from 1 keyboard at a time. This is what it looks like from the back. So you can see the monitors are in the form of projectors. You can see the same everything there. 1 person at the keyboard. And that's about it. So this gives you a lot of idea of what this looks like.
So there's 7 people in the room?
At this time, there's 5. There can be, we've had as many as 12 and even more working at the same time.
And they're all programmers?
Not necessarily. In that other picture, we had a DBA, we had a business objects expert, and it just depends. We can all think of them as all programmers.
All software engineers?
Software people. And this, in this particular view, this includes...
So it's not management necessarily?
Yeah, I represent a manager in
Business
this.
owner.
Yeah, but I am a developer. We'll see more about that. So this is what I'd like to show you now, and I don't know how well this will film, but this is a time lapse, so it should work okay. So we did this about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, and I'll kind of talk about it as we go. So in this case, I think we have 6 people working this day. And we spend the first hour in a skills learning session or skills improvement session. We don't do stand-ups. We just, in this particular case, we spend the first hour every day studying something that we're trying to study. Now we're getting to work. You'll notice we have the 2 monitors, the single computer. We've got 2 keyboards, and there's a person that we call the driver. The driver is rotated out every 15 minutes. So you see it just switched to another person. Everyone else is considered a navigator. Our product owners or product people come and sit with us and work with us directly, and usually every day. We've got a manager, coach. They never do any real work. Mm-hmm. So here we are just working. Usually we're showing our customer, so to speak, what it is we're working on and talking about what we're going to work on next. And then we go right into that next thing and we start working. And I'll go into more details as we go. You notice that we need to do some solo work like an expense report. We've got an area where we all have our own desks and we can go work in our own area. And you can see the person at the keyboard switches up continually throughout the day every 15 minutes.
And is that a pretty rigid schedule, the 15 minutes?
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Okay. It can be mixed up in any number of ways. We take lunch. We work an 8-hour day and we take 1 hour at lunch. Usually, most of us go out and hike. We have some beautiful hills nearby, and we got some nice trails. So at lunch, we go and take a walk together. It's really more of a hike. It's not like just a stroll. Then when we get back, we spend a few minutes maybe doing emails, looking at something that we're working on, and then we're back at work. So you'll see that we've got 1 keyboard there is a natural keyboard. The other keyboard is a standard keyboard, so people can use the one they want. The team functions as a team throughout the day. We stay relatively happy. And that's sort of an important thing, as a matter of fact. You see there are other computers around. I'm always sitting at the end of the table with my own computer. You'll notice I don't join in the rotation. We'll talk about that a little bit. Everybody stays pretty engaged. It doesn't really matter whether they do or not. There's very rarely any of the food coma that you get after lunch. Sorry about the coughing. So essentially, all the expertise that we need is in this room. Not all of it, but most of it, all day long. And this is just a reiteration of the same thing.
Does the composition of the people in the room change over the course of a project?
Not much. We are a small team, and we pretty much stay together. There are other people we call in.
This is a phase of the project where we need graphic designers.
Yeah, we would all do that work together if we needed that. If we needed an expert in that we don't have, they would come and just work with us.
Got it.
So we're at the end of the day. So that's an 8-hour day in film as a, what do they call that? A time lapse. Okay. So those of you who've seen my other talks will remember this. The object isn't to make great software, it's to be in that wonderful state which makes great software inevitable. It's about putting the environment together. And that, of course, is a paraphrase from a saying from Robert Henry. And his saying is, the object isn't to make art, it's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable. It's about putting everything together so that things will happen instead of merely forcing things to happen. So why would we work this way? This is audience participation time. Why would we work in such a way? Now there's only 2 of you, so you both have to participate.
It's more fun.
It is a lot more fun.
Certainly, there's a lot more communication.
A lot of communication.
I'm curious because at the beginning of the talk you mentioned a 10x productivity increase.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, how do you measure that?
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. Any question you might have, we'll cover in this talk. And if we don't cover it, I'll cover afterwards.
All right.
But we do cover that. So here's the thing. This is really critical to me. This is why we work this way.
Because the team decided.
The team decided to.
And because you didn't have a manager telling you, no, you can't do that.
Well, so that's about the environment. So what you guys brought up were benefits of what we have. So this is about the idea of turning up the good. If we notice something's working well, we turn it up. So if we have time, we'll talk about how we started doing this, and that'll answer some of those questions. You can see we have a fully loaded board back there. And although this is kind of a posed picture, in reality the other pictures weren't, this is sort of how we feel all day. So how can we work this way? Now that is not audience participation, I'm just going to tell you. This is about individuals and interactions. But to be able to have individuals interacting, there's something that's really important. This is what we found. That we need to act with kindness and consideration and respect for each other. We extend kindness to each other. And we are always considerate of each other. And we respect each other. Without this, I'm not sure we could work this way. So this is not necessarily where you have to start from, but you have to learn to get to this point so that you have the ability to work day in and day out with the same group of people.
Well, and that this kind of working together in this manner, I think, would help to build that.
It certainly does. As a matter of fact, let me speak to that for a second. I'm the worst guy to work with. I get frustrated easily. I'm impatient. I'm pushy. And by working with other people who are focused also on kindness, consideration, and respect, it makes me a better person. I treat them with more kindness because they're treating me with kindness. They can point out when I'm being too brusque or too pushy. And I learn to be a better person. So there's actually some nice give and take here, but we'll cover this even more as we go. So another thing is we use a practice. So that's sort of a philosophy of how we work, and we have a practice of how we work. And this practice we call driver navigator, or I'm kind of changing it now to driver navigators. So we'll kind of look at that. You'll notice that, first of all, that there's always one person at the keyboard, and that person is the driver. And then everyone else is a navigator. So if we think about the navigators as being the people who are thinking about the work that we're doing and what's going to end up in the program that we're writing, and the driver as someone who can translate those ideas into code, that's essentially what we have. As opposed to what we normally have when it's an individual coding, they have to both think about what they want the thing to do and figure out how to turn it into code. The turning it into code is merely a translation process, but we often think about it as the hard work of software development, but it's not, in my opinion. It's the thinking about what do we want this to do and the bigger sense how it's going to do that. So I made a little a little animation of how this works in a way. So you'll be impressed with that. There's the keyboard. We talked about that. Then we have this thing, this person we call the driver. And the driver, it's always kind of a happy-go-lucky guy, I guess, is just a member of a bigger team that includes navigators. So everybody participates as a navigator. The navigators are the ones who are deciding what we're doing, and the driver puts that into code. To make this work, we rotate every 15 minutes. So I'll address that here. We chose 15 minutes because that's what the team wants to do. We could be using 4 minutes, we could use 20 minutes. And I've seen other teams have other ways rather than having a minute limit to the rotation. And we change it up through the day. If we have more people, sometimes we turn the rotation down to 10 minutes or 8 minutes.
Can you use a timer?
We have a timer, and I'll talk about that in a minute too. So this is what it kind of looks like. We set up our timer. It's got a list of the people who are working today. It's usually the same group. And the first, it randomizes it. The first one to get going just takes their seat, and they work for 15 minutes while the navigators talk about what we're doing, and the driver translates. And then we just keep going. You notice I'm not clicking any buttons right now. It's a wonderful animation. Yes. Anyways.
How does the driver know when the talk has resolved itself to something that should be translated?
Well, they're part of the conversation. So they're going to be, so the way that I used to do this with pair programming is, as soon as I have enough to be, to do for the moment, the navigator knows I'm working. And so he's thinking about where are we going next with it. And then as soon as I'm kind of caught up, I just say, hey, yeah, okay, I got that. But in this case, since we're all looking at it at the same time, we know the pace. We know what's going on. So that as the driver's working, somebody could easily be pointing out, wait a second, you're not getting the right thing there. Or, hey, there's a better way to do that. Or here's a shortcut, and all kinds of things. So there's a lot of communication going on. It's very dynamic.
And this is the coding, the translating, is more of a fixed, there's not so much a latitude as there is when people are wordsmithing, in which case there's a ton.
Well, coding is it's a very strict thing. So most languages have a few dozen to a few hundred keywords, and then you have libraries they're using, but it's especially in the languages we're using, which are compiled languages, they're pretty strict. It's not like writing in English. So in reality, actually, what we're trying to do is think where humans think best at a more human level, and then translate it into code, which is the limited level at which a computer can understand what we want it to do. So there's really two levels of thinking going on here, but when somebody works solo, the developer who works solo almost is always working in both the human level and the coding level, so they're doing a switching all the time on their own, whereas as in this model, either with a pair or with a mob, we aren't working so much. The driver can focus more on just translating, and the team is working on the higher level. We'll talk more about that.
And do you find that the driver tends to contribute less to the discussion part of it and more to just the typing? And
Well, that's why we have a driver. So the driver's main task is to be gathering the things that are being said into the code.
Right.
Okay, so
you're most relaxed when you're driving because you don't have to actually think as much.
yeah, and there's a relaxed feeling all the way across.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about some of these things too.
So
then,
has this model been adapted to any other settings that you're aware of?
no, but I think in reverse, there's a lot of settings where this model works. I mean, it's done. I've watched shows about how they put magazines, like a fashion magazine, together, and watched how they're working. And I'm going, that's kind of similar to this.
Well,
and then
surgery
surgery could be. It could be. It might be a slight reverse version of this, but also maybe how a band works, who's putting music together. So there's correlations to a lot of other things. But I haven't tried to promote this in any way. It's just the way we work, and people have asked us to share, so we put these slides together to be able to do that. Yeah, so I don't see any reason why these ideas don't correlate with other things.
Basically what I found was that there was this one relatively precise, not much contested place.
I see what you're saying. Now, somebody did a workshop with mob programming at a about content development for a website, which is sort of more like what you're talking about. And so it's more of a lean kind of operation where you're pulling work through the system, you're flowing work to a team. And I think you could find that for a lot of articles, a group of people could do a better job of writing it than an individual. It might be worth experimenting with. But we'll go on. So we showed you a little bit of our philosophy: kindness, consideration, respect. We showed you a little bit of one of the practices we do, which we consider the driver navigators. So this is our timer. So I'll talk about the timer just a little bit. We started with a phone like this that has timers on them, and we noticed we would just ignore the beeping going off. So we really had to force ourselves to pay attention. So I got a much louder timer that we could not ignore so much, and we ignored it anyway. So one of the guys on the team said, well, I could write something, and what he wrote locks out the screen. Okay? So I'm going to talk about that for a second. What's really important about this is that well, it's not, there's no save button. I mean, everything gets saved continuously.
It's just you can no longer work.
Yeah, every time we run our tests, everything gets saved anyways. Here's the thing, we are really attached to the keyboards. And we have to learn to release ourselves from that. Right. And that's a big problem with a lot of people. So we noticed that this allowed us to just break that connection with the computer, and let's learn how to think at a human level and express it well. So we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. We need to be able to express our ideas so everybody can understand it. And it gives us a way of doing code reviews in real time.
Right, you don't need to code review.
Right, our code is being pre-reviewed, is previewed, where the ideas are being vetted by a team of experts all the time. So this worked well. So this area up here that's got the blank box, when we hit the button, it drops all the names of the developers in there, and then we could add individuals if we want. We got a timer set in the other area where we can set how long we're going to work, and we usually set it for 15 minutes. But we don't necessarily advise 15 minutes. 15 minutes just happens to be what we think is working for us. When I do coding dojos at events like this, I usually set it as a 4-minute timer. Okay, and then instead of switch it up, whoever's turn to code, that will show up there. It will say, like, Aaron, please sit down at the computer. It's a very polite application. So we have to have one rule, and one rule is the only person who can click the reset timer button is the person who's supposed to be sitting down. Because otherwise we'd click on it and just keep going again. So everybody has to pay attention and say, wait, hey, he's got to sit down. We're sort of in a pattern now where we don't have a problem with that anymore. So let's go on. Let's go on, because we'll answer the questions at the end. Because otherwise I won't get done. So this is the question that always gets asked. Productivity. How can we be productive with 5 people at one computer? So the first thing that I want to express is productivity is important, but it's only one of a handful of very important things, and it's not at the top of my list. The other things that are more important is communication. It is figuring out what's the right thing, learning quickly what was the wrong thing, being able to make good decisions. Those things are at least as important as productivity. The problem with productivity often is we're kind of gauging how much work we're getting done instead of how much good results we're getting. And results isn't just getting work done. Results is having things people can actually use and are bringing real value to us. So this is what I have to say about that. We noticed as 5 individuals we were getting so much work done. And we noticed when we worked as a group we were getting mountains more work done. What is the number? I don't know. That 10 times that you saw at the beginning of that video was arbitrarily stuck in there, because when I was editing that time lapse to put the wording and stuff in there, the guy I was working with said, well, you guys are obviously doing better than you were. We got to put something there. And I gave him the same speech I just gave, which is productivity isn't the most important thing. But he said, everybody's going to want to know. And I said, well, 10 times. And so he put that in there. But I would say in this particular organization, we got a lot of improvement. So I don't know what anyone else would get. And to me, those numbers are, we don't know if a blue card here is worth the same as a blue card there, or a yellow card here is worth the same as a yellow card there. I don't have any good way of measuring, and I think most of the people who claim they do are, to put it politely, possibly mistaken, to put it not so politely. They're wrong. You know, I don't think that it's worth trying to get so accurate in determining how much we're getting done. But, you know, somebody's going to flame me on the internet if this gets out on the internet now. So, what are the things that destroy productivity? So you're a developer, but you're not, and you're not. So let's see if we can at least, what do you think are things that would destroy productivity?
Doing the wrong work.
Doing the wrong work.
Just cognitive drain, like your brain just kind of wears out.
I like that. Cognitive drain. Try one.
Just getting sidetracked.
Getting sidetracked. Writers get sidetracked really easily. Programmers much even. I had a job once where I was hired to keep, and even what I would consider one of the most brilliant programmers I worked with, from going down rabbit holes. He would go down rabbit holes. Oh wait, this isn't compiling fast enough. Why isn't this compiling fast enough? He'd want to solve that problem. And he'd go down that for 3 or 4 hours and finally say, I'm not getting anywhere. So I was there to keep him on task. So yeah, it's very easy to get sidetracked. It's not bad to get sidetracked sometimes, but dang, not all the time. What else?
Miscommunication.
Miscommunication. I think we have enough. So let's hear, I've got a short list here. Communication problems. Decision-making problems, doing the wrong thing. Doing more than is barely sufficient. That happens very often. That happens on both sides. Coders do it, they call it gold plating, but I notice the product side people do that an awful lot. Technical debt starts slowing us down. That's where our code is getting harder and harder to work on. That might happen in other worlds. I know my wife with her art, she follows sort of another Robert Henry quote, which is you get down a few lines and then you watch for what those lines call out. That's how you proceed. Sometimes you get to a point where you're no longer communicating with your piece. And with my wife, it's like, chuck that one. And with other people, they'll just keep working on it forever. And she does that sometimes, 3 or 4 days. She's on something and finally, and that's sort of the garbage that's collecting. That garbage is collecting and it no longer is communicating to us. Thrashing. Now, you might not know thrashing. Thrashing, the term, when I first heard it, was about hard drives. When you have a paging memory problem on your computer, it's not configured well or it's running out of memory and it's moving stuff back and forth to the hard drive all the time, you hear the hard drive start, well, when we used to have physical hard drives, start making a lot of sound, kind of a sound, and that thing's doing that because it's physically moving the head around a lot. That's thrashing in the hard drive, but thrashing of humans is going from task to task, getting pulled off of one thing to work on something else. Oh, this is more important. Maybe you never get back to that other thing. That implies a lot of waste. The politics, I have no answers for most politics in business, but we'll cover a little bit of it. And meetings. Meetings can be a big drain. We hear that come up very frequently. I'm in 12 meetings this week. When am I going to actually get my work done? You know? So these are things that destroy productivity. And there's many, many others. I think by now we've identified something like 40 of them. 40 different things that we notice destroy productivity. So I'm going to cover each one of these just a little bit because we only have a few minutes here. But I used to do a 2-day workshop on the communication problems. Those alone, if you just solve most of those, you'll get a lot more productivity. So now I'm going to take a big step forward here. We didn't set out to solve any of these problems. What we noticed was these problems started going away. So there was kind of a rule that we've learned, and that is that as you turn up the good, the bad often just fades away. You don't need to work on those things. They go away accidentally as a side effect of turning up the good. Pretty interesting. So you notice something good, turn it up. You turn it up to the point where it's no longer turn-upable. It's gone as far as it can go and continue to bring you more value. Alrighty, so communication problems. I'm going to share one example from my career. I took a job to write some software, 3-month contract. Well, you're the only programmer here, but I'm going to pose the question. How long did I work on a 3-month project?
6 months.
6 stinking months. 6 months.
In 3 months, or it actually took 6 months?
They always, if you take a 3-month contract, you know that at the end of 3 months, they're going to extend it another 3 months. This was this situation. They introduced me to the person who was the business owner of this chunk of code, or this application. They introduced me to him. I sat with him for an hour. He gave me the requirements document. He says, you can turn to me for answers of any questions. I'll be available every Monday for an hour. No problem. So I went to my desk, started on it. At the end of that day, I had some questions, and I went to my boss. So I really need to talk to the business guy. You can't. You only get him one hour. He's got this other stuff he's working on. So that happens a lot in companies. They protect the resources so they can get their work done, but you can't get your work done. So at the end of the week, next Monday morning, I get my questions answered. I had 2 or 3 questions that were blocking me, and I really couldn't do any other work on that project.
Right, it took a week to get your answer.
It took a week to get the answer. So what happened then? I got my answers, and by that afternoon, I was blocked again. So I went to my boss. He says, look, just save up your questions. Well, you can't save up your questions. You're blocked. You can't move on to the next things because you can't get past the point you're blocked at. So at the end of 3 months, they extended the contract. I just kept working. I told my boss every week, look, I need to have more access. No, that's just the way we work here. This place had a couple hundred developers. They knew what they were doing, obviously. At the end of 6 months, the thing got delivered. It was a Windows service. Any programmer can write a Windows service. There's no difficulty writing a Windows service. What there's a difficulty doing is knowing what you want the Windows service to do. And so that's what it took. So I did a value stream map. I don't know if you guys know what a value stream map is, but basically you map when you're giving value, and that's like across the top. Then you can move down on this chart when you're not giving value. When you're giving value, you go back up. Then you can press the chart by the stuff when you weren't giving value, and you know how long it really took you. It took me about 2 weeks to write this software. So that's a communication problem. We solved that communication problem with mob programming within the team by we're always available to answer questions for each other. I've worked on teams where the lead guy was never available to answer questions because he was too valuable. He was working on a bunch of other stuff. You notice that in this case, we have our product owner type. He's somebody who actually has a job somewhere else in the company, and they need software that we write. So we're writing software for them, and we have agreement with them. You'll meet with us at least once a day. If we ever have a question, you'll answer the phone and respond immediately. That's the agreement we have with them. If they can't, because sometimes they can't, we will try and work on something else for them. But if we continue being blocked, we'll move off to something else, and then they lose our bandwidth. They lose our time. So we have this arrangement. Those communication problems went away, but there are many other that disappeared by continuous delivery and other things, not just mob programming, a lot of agile things. Let's go on. Decision-making problems. Are we working on the right thing? This is a big problem. So first of all, I stole this image again from my wife. It has nothing to do with this slide, but this is how I use it. The crab wants to have a meal of a worm. So he's going to try and take that worm.
It's a big worm.
But he knows that sometimes when you take a worm, it's attached to some big nasty thing that's going to kill him. And he's gotten away from enough of those to know that that's something he can be afraid of. So he's reluctant to make the decision to take the worm. In this case, it's probably a really good decision. But the thing is, we often resist making decisions. And what we do is we start bringing other people in. And we start asking them for their ideas. And then we bring our boss in. And we start getting other people to approve things. And then we make long documents about why we're making this decision. And we get somebody else with responsibility to sign off on it. So making decisions is a very difficult thing. And sadly, after we've made the decision, we now have to protect it. We have to protect that we made this decision. So this is the reluctance to give up on our decision once it's been made. Our name is on that document, and our boss's name is on that document. And this is kind of just a fun picture, but I like to think of this as my wife is waiting for me to get home, and she's becoming more and more irrational. And she's got the shotgun, and she's got her manager there, getting madder and madder. And although this has nothing to do with that, this was about getting a flu shot story she wrote. But it's interesting to me, though, how reluctant we are to give up on a bad decision once we've committed to that bad decision. So there's two sides to the decision problem. We're reluctant to make it because we're afraid that once we've made it, we can get in trouble. And then once we made it, we protect it. This is only one decision-making problem. But we've solved that in most ways with our mom. First of all, when it's just one of us and we want to take action, that's a problem. Let's say this guy is really mad. He can't take it anymore. He's going to tar and feather someone and run him out of town. Can he do that? Well, he's kind of small. Somebody's going to calm him down, or he's going to get arrested before he can do that. But these guys are going to do it. Nobody is going to try to arrest him. And even before they realized it was a bad decision, they were going to have made the decision and taken the action. Because they know that tomorrow they can reverse it easily, and there's no one to blame for making the decision. They don't have to answer to anyone. They made a bad decision, they can undo it. Most of the time it's a good decision in our particular case. But when it turns out to be a bad decision, we have to make a lot of bad decisions trying to determine what is the right decision. Whereas when all we do is wait and think and try to figure out what's right, we often lose the opportunity to make a good decision. So that's how we look at it. We have the support of everyone on the team, plus my boss, plus the product people, the product owners, and we all can work together to get to a decision, knowing we're paying as little as possible for the bad decisions, and we have a much better chance of getting good decisions. So this is the thing about the bare necessities. If we do more than the bare necessities, we are wasting time. So we focus, as the mob, we focus on only doing things that are critical to be done. When it's just one person doing that, it's hard to do.
So this
but when
is the minimum viable product.
this is minimum viable product, but it can mean minimum viable anything, right? So it could mean, a good example in the case of what we do is, you can go down that rabbit hole of trying to figure out why the compiler isn't compiling fast. Or you can just put that on the parking lot and say, okay, yeah, that looks like a problem. You write it down and put it up there. Let's get through with the work we're doing, and let's address that later. So sometimes we go down the wrong thing, and we're working on the wrong problem. And I would lump that perhaps into here. Another one, though, is a product owner saying, in the earlier days, I know if I don't ask for all this stuff, I'll never get this stuff. So they ask for everything. And that just labors up the product. In a chart that I drew in the last one of my earlier talks, I showed how a project concept can be like this big blob. And inside that big blob are probably some really valuable things and some not so valuable things and some really bad things. So what we want to do is find a way to discover the really good things as quickly as we can. And we end up pretty quickly doing that in this model by only doing things that we think are of its value, and we do as small a chunk of it as possible. And our product owners join us on this concept because they like the idea of getting something good quickly instead of in 3 months from now. Can we deliver this to them today or tomorrow? And just a little bit more every day, every day. We had one where after the first 3 or 4 things that we got done, they said, that's enough. That's enough. And that value is super high to me. Is when they start seeing that they can get the things they think are most important, they don't need to think so much about all those other things. That frees them up. That frees our time up. We serve 7 departments. It frees us up to serve everybody instead of spending all our time on one customer. Okay, so technical debt. And I love this picture. So we hear in the technical world the idea of garbage in, garbage out. You always hear that about data. But with technical debt, it's garbage in, garbage stays. So both my wife and I kind of have a weight problem. So we know that garbage in, garbage stays. We always gain weight if we start eating the stuff we shouldn't be eating. And this is sort of how technical debt builds up on us. When we don't take care of something now, and we say, oh, we'll fix that later, it's going to be a problem. If it's a hack, then we're going to end up doing hacks on top of hacks. If it's something that we should have thought through better, we're going to need to find ways to work around the things we didn't think through better. So we always keep our technical debt as low as possible. And with having 5 or 6 people watching that, we never have the problems build up. Because almost always somebody will say, wait, we need to refactor that. As soon as we're done with writing a test and making it pass, we refactor it. So the technical debt doesn't grow. As soon as we see something that, matter of fact, we'll talk about patterns for a second. When you have 3 people individually working on things, and there's a pattern in the things they're working on, they can't see it. I'm looking at this, he's looking at that, she's looking at that. We can't see the pattern. But if we're all looking at this, and then we're all looking at that, almost instantly somebody's go, that's similar to that thing we were working on last week. And then we're working on the next one, somebody else is going to say, that's just like those two other things. And it's at that moment we can go, let's find out what's common, abstract that out, and that gets rid of technical debt. So we start seeing the patterns that we can't see when we're working on things individually. And we even don't see those things often later. When there's 3 different implementations of a similar idea, those implementations are enough different that we don't notice that it's a similar idea. So this helps solve that. So the thrashing problem. So that's my dog Homer. Homer's a happy-go-lucky dog most of the time. But when there's a noise, it rattles him. And he goes and sits in the corner and shakes. And that's sort of what thrashing is to programmers. You got somebody who's happy working away on something, and the boss comes in and goes, hey, you got to put that aside. We've got this thing for the trade show we got to do right now. Or whatever. And it could be all kinds of things. So I noticed with thrashing, I started writing little things about thrashing years ago and trying to present them at conferences. And here's what I noticed. You can either solve the thrashing by blocking the thrashing attempts, or you can solve it by making them irrelevant. Like we have some way to work even when the thrashing is going on around us. So what we found with the team is we automatically get both of those because there's a sort of a team memory going on. So somebody comes in and takes a team member away, which rarely happens, but when it does happen, the rest of the team can keep working. And when that person comes back, they can get up to speed very quickly. We didn't lose any speed because of it. Whereas with a team of separate workers, they come in, often what will happen is the vice president will come and say, hey, I need Joe. Let's make it Josephina, because then we've got, parity or whatever. And so, Josephina, come and work. We got this trade show coming up. Well, why did they choose Josephina? Why does the boss want Josephina? She's the best. She's the best. It's always, that's the best. They get stuff done. Well, the rest of the team is depending on Josephina. She's the go-to person. And now she's gone. So it's thrashing Josephina. She's not focusing on her work. And it's thrashing the team. They don't have their go-to person anymore. All of these things are protected now when we're working as a mob. Because even when the most important person is dragged off the team for a little while, the rest of the team has enough understanding, which we gained over the time of working together on something. We have a shared understanding, those shared decisions. All of this is playing together to make the thrashing less difficult for us. But the opposite also happens, the blocking of it. People come to our area and they see we're working, and they don't want to interrupt us. Oh, you guys are working. We'll come back later. Well, after 2 or 3, say, oh, you guys are working. Come back later. They stop trying. So the thrashing doesn't happen. So even the first time that we noticed it happening, somebody came up.
Intimidating, so they don't interrupt you.
That's right. So we actually, at an earlier company I worked at, we noticed this thrashing happening, and I got my team together, and I said, what can we do about this? And we set up a buddy system. So what we would do is the one guy that was facing, so we had an open work area and our team was over here. The one guy was facing across the way and could see when people came into our area. When he saw a vice president come in and it looked like they were coming our way, he would get up and sit next to the most important person. And then when the vice president would go over there, then he'd go, oh no, wait, we're really busy right now. Can we talk to you in a while? So it was like a way of putting off that vice president. And then, because the rule was, then go and get Woody. Then I would go and talk to the vice president. So that way, they couldn't just drag someone off when I wasn't there. Right. Which was often happening. I actually got a wonderful meeting because of that. They took me into a room and started yelling at me for protecting my team members. Right. So that was an interesting thing to me, that we're charged with getting work done, and then we are blamed for stopping people from harming our ability to get the work done. It's really a weird thing. The world's a great place. Anyways, so politics. Now, I don't have any answers about politics. Outside of the team. I think we need to learn to influence everybody, and we invite people from the other departments that we're working with to work with us. And most of them who are willing to do that get a lot of value quickly. So we solve the political problem of needing to communicate constantly up the chain and back down across departments. So we're breaking down communication barriers. But I can talk about on-team politics. One of the political problems on a team is that the person that most people want to go to help for also is charged with getting a lot of work done. So if they just helped everyone else all the time, they wouldn't be getting their work done. So their performance reviews would show they don't get their work done. So they have to put off when people ask them for help. Say, look, I don't have time to help you right now. I got to get my work done. So that goes away with our mob. We're all working on the same thing. We're always working on one thing all at the same time. It's an interesting way of working. And it keeps us from, we all work at the same level, so to speak. We might have a programmer 4, which is the highest level, and a programmer 2. But as far as the nature of the work we do, we're all working on the same work. So if it's a thing that only the expert knows about, everybody else starts knowing about it. And we'll see that in another slide. A couple down from this. So meetings are a big drain on productivity. Now some people look at the mob programming and say, oh, you guys are meeting all the time. But there's a difference. Most meetings are like this. We're going to gather together to share some understanding or knowledge about something, gain an understanding. We're going to decide who should have responsibility to do what. We're going to make those assignments, and then everybody goes off and does their work. So the meeting wasn't for doing work. It was for deciding what work to do and who would do the work. That's a typical meeting. What we do could be thought more of like a workshop or a working meeting, where we come together to do the work, not just discuss the work. So I took this picture from my wife because I'd like to think these people are either going to a meeting or coming from a meeting. We can't tell which, because that's sort of what happens.
From a meeting because they've been feeding.
Somebody got you.
I have no way to know. But I do feel that this really does represent the way most developers anyways think of meetings. And so the idea that I've just gotten into this thing and now I got to go to a meeting. Then we're in a meeting and what are they doing? Developers are not paying attention because this is so much of a drag.
Because their mind is back at their desk.
Yeah, and they've got all kinds of things that are racing around in their mind. Meetings are very disruptive. So we got to find a way to get away from it. Well, how many meetings does our team have? 0. When our product owners, product people come to us, our meetings are while we're working. We're showing them the things that we're doing, we're talking about it, we're even making changes, and we invite them to take the keyboard and work right along with us if they would. They often don't, but sometimes some of them do. So this solved most of the meetings. So what we're saying is, we noticed something good, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We turned it up, and we got all these benefits out of it, without specifically working on any of these things. So now we'll talk about the continuous learning. What we've noticed, and I'll cover this really quickly, is we're always in a learning mode. We're either teaching something or we're getting something. And sometimes we've noticed there's 2 things. We need to have a good sense of humor. This light isn't working too good. About the mistakes other people make. We have to have, because like in most cases, that's something I did wrong once too. That's exactly the same mistake I made. So if I pretend that you're a knucklehead because you messed up, then we're going to break the relationship. If that mother was saying, you stupid kid, you're never going to be able to cook, then we're kind of ruining the whole thing. We have to say, I made that same exact mistake too. What a mess, let's clean it up. You know, you got to have that attitude. The other one though, is that sometimes the expert learns something from the beginner. And I've noticed this happening so often now that I think that working with much junior people to yourself is a critical part of becoming better. I'm not sure I can express it much better than that right now, but I think that's an important part of the working arrangement. We have to realize we're going to learn a lot from those people who don't know nearly as much as we do. I won't cover much more because we're going to run out of time. This is a critical issue. You have to understand that you are in danger of being exposed, and any frailties you have will be exposed. So that is one downside to it, but I think it's an upside. It's a downside because we're comfortable when we don't have to show our problems, but it's an upside because we learn how to put up with other people's problems too, because we have to treat them with kindness and respect if we expect them to treat us with kindness and respect when we are shown to have a problem. I love this picture. It has almost nothing to do with this except for that this poor squirrel knows there's danger nearby, but he doesn't know where or how. It's pretty cool. So, cover this very quickly. You'll notice that we had 2 keyboards. We each have our own chair. We roll our chair up to the keyboard when it's our time at the keyboard. Because chairs we want to adjust for our own back, for our own posture. You notice in the film, one of the people had pretty bad carpal tunnel. We don't get carpal tunnel anymore because we are not typing all the time. That person brought that to the team. They already had it pretty bad. We don't. We're not at the keyboard all day long. We watch things, we use hand sanitizer. We're sitting far enough apart from each other where we're not coughing on each other. So a lot of people work in pairs, they work really close to each other. We keep ourselves far apart so that we're spreading germs around less. We pay attention by getting up often. Anytime you need to take a break, you go do it. If you've got something that you need to do some brain work on and you just don't feel you can do it in a group, you can just go off and be alone anytime you want. It's very dynamic. Nobody's forced to participate. Everybody participates by choice. We keep ourselves sane and sustainable. Like I said earlier, we have an 8-hour working day. So we don't have overtime and we don't have pressure. I usually give a few examples of things you can try. Without programmers here, we probably won't go into it. We have 3 minutes or so left here. And I'll give you this story real quick. We didn't set out to invent anything. What happened was we gathered for a regular meeting, and we had just spent 6 months. I'm going to use my hands. We had spent 6 months of me, I got hired on this place, introducing the ideas of how to work in a more agile way to this company where I work. And during that 6 months, I was teaching TDD, I was teaching pair programming, I was teaching working in iterations, but in a very gentle model by example kind of a thing. And we were doing regular weekly meeting sessions where we would spend 2 hours, 2.5 hours studying. And what ended up happening was, when we had this meeting for a big job we were going to work on, a big project, we gathered and we started passing the keyboard around. So somebody would say, oh wait, I know where that's in the database. And somebody would say, oh, I know where that's at in the code. And this was something that was siloed. One person had been working on with a contractor. Now we had the whole team to look at it because we needed to get it done faster. And we started passing that keyboard around. And at the end of about an hour, we had already learned to pay attention to what's working. About the end of an hour, and our meeting schedule was ending, so we said, well, let's extend the meeting. This is working really well. So at the end of the day, at that time we were doing retrospectives every day, we noticed on our retrospective that everybody felt we were making a lot of progress. So we decided, well, let's schedule some meeting times tomorrow. So we found some meeting rooms we could use, spread out across the company. We went over here for an hour, went over there for an hour. And at the end of the week, we had done a lot of this. And our retrospective showed we really like working together. We don't like having to move from room to room. So we found a room that my boss let me use, like a little closet almost. And we set up in there with a couple projectors and we started working. And we haven't stopped since then. So it was just something by turning up the good of noticing this is working, let's keep doing it. What was bad? We need to have our own room. What was bad? The projector isn't very good. Let's get a better projector. What was bad? We have these uncomfortable chairs. Let's get better chairs. The things we're fixing, we're making it easier and easier to work together. So that's sort of, I think, the main overall lesson. So let's cover that. If you adopt only one practice, what we say is let it be retrospectives. Do them all the time. Get good at them. Get really good at them. We're not promoting the idea of doing mob programming. What we're promoting, the idea, is to figure out what works best for your team, not what works best for my team. It just happened this is what worked good for us. It may not work for other people, but we share it because people have asked us to share it. Somebody came to our company, saw that we were doing this, started telling other people outside of our company about it, and we started getting emails from people saying, what is this thing you're doing? So, to finish it off, people always ask this question. Do you recommend it? Well, I just kind of answered it. No, we're just sharing. What it comes down to is we invite you to explore, innovate, pay attention to what works, listen, see, tune, adjust. That's what we need to do. Hi, Harold. So that's the end of it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Oh, a standing ovation. Well, Harold's the only one standing.
So I guess the topic for us today is coaching and supervising and managing. And I didn't come with any preset agenda topics. I just thought it'd be good that we'd have a discussion about this and deal with each other's problems and suggestions and stuff like that. So I guess the best way to start off is if anybody has any tips they want to share or any problems they want to address within their team or goals that they're trying to achieve or something.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've been exposed to a lot of different teams over my career, and what I find is your method of coaching, how you interact with people stays the same. You treat everyone with respect, but if your goal is to get something out very quickly, you got 2 weeks with these people, you got to get it done, and then you're never going to see them again. It's very different than if I'm building an engineering team that we're going to build product with for the next 2 or 3 years. It's not that you treat people differently in terms of respect and honesty, et cetera, but how you manage that team changes dramatically because you have a set of tasks you have to get done, and so it's very crisp versus building the relationships with your team members that it's going to be a long-term investment. It's kind of like the difference between a date and a marriage. A lot of difference. Been going on a date and then building a marriage that's going to last the rest of your life. So the question is, what's the team you're going to be working with, and how long will you be working with that team?
Well, what's your situation right now?
My team, I expect to be there for a while. It's a small team with a good skill set that's diverse, and we have a lot of different technical challenges, so we'll be spanning tech with multiple people. So you may work on Java this month, the next month you might be working on C#. So what I'm trying to do is build as much depth as I can on both mobile and system backend, system server side. And also I'm trying to share the wealth so that we build the skill sets across the team so we can back each other up. And that's what I'm doing right now, is building depth into my small team so that I have a backup, so I have no single point of failure for any of my systems. There's a good one. Yeah, he's got burned by that before, I can tell.
Well, I mean, I'm in a situation where, so my team is me and 2 other people, and I'm the programmer. I write the vast majority of the code, and even in central IT, in my bigger team, I'm the only one that can write the code that I can, and so, like, single point of failure, it's just a stressful place to be, if the tool that allows students to log into student email were to break tomorrow, I am the only one that has the ability to fix that. Not that like somebody like Dan couldn't pick it up, but it's written in .NET with C# using these super contrived Microsoft libraries. It's not like a trivial, just like whip it out kind of a thing. So it's an interesting place to be on the other end of that as well.
Would you cookbook the key things that would have to be repaired if there was a failure, so that someone could come in behind you if you weren't there, run this command, this command, this command, this will usually fix it?
I mean, luckily,
right?
Luckily, for the most part, when that particular system breaks, it's because Microsoft has changed something on their end.
Oh yeah.
I think they either didn't document it or didn't communicate, or the people that they communicated to didn't communicate it to us or whatnot. But yeah, it's interesting. Our team we all sort of do our own. Our team is super small, and we have such a wide sort of. We all do so many things that like we're terrible at cross training, and to some extent, like, that's really terrible. But to some extent, like, I don't have time to learn all the things that the other 2 folks do, and they certainly don't have time to learn all the things that I do.
Well, if it's a skill set deficit across the team, like you're a C# specialist and this person's a Java specialist, you can't just you can step over and read the code and understand the logic, perhaps, but all the libraries behind it and everything else, that's specialized knowledge that if you don't have, you may or may not be able to correct a failure.
Well, the architecture behind it, what
Very
hooks
different.
up to what, that's what I know the least about what Nick does. I'm one of the 3 people. It's me, it's Nick, and it's Carl, so.
Well, now, it's, as a manager, first thing I look at is if I walk into that situation is I have a tremendous risk that if Nick takes a job for Apple next week and leaves Montana, I have no backfill. So the first thing I would do is understand exactly what systems you're working on, what documentation we have in place, what skill sets are necessary, So maybe the next guy I hire has some background in C#. Right? So you try and manage that in, or you build it in someone else that's interested in learning about it. But that's why I said, what are the cookbooks for recovery? Because most systems, there's a few basic things you try first, right? So you cookbook that stuff out, then anyone can try it. But then it's a question of, I've got, what we're talking about this morning, right? Time, money, quality, right? So for me to maintain a level of quality to my clients, I have this much budget. That means I have this much time. And you manage to provide the best quality you can.
So I kind of wonder, part of the topic of this is kind of the concept of coaching and maybe supervising and maybe mentoring and things like that. Does anybody's office have a formal program where they look at the concepts of either coaching or mentoring or things like that to deal with some of the problems that they've got?
Not really. I've been, like in where I'm at, I got a guy that I work with a lot. He came in with a skill set based in primarily marketing, but he's been doing a lot of the SEO work on the website. And since a lot of that can kind of be tied in with some HTML, it's where I've been kind of teaching him HTML, CSS, and he's showing a lot of promise and that kind of stuff and really taking to it and doing a lot extra learning in his time. So then I take time to go through and currently I'm teaching him some jQuery so he can be a little bit more effective, but at the same time trying to be aware of our resources and stuff too. So I'm trying to build skill sets in him to make him more effective with work that we have there that will have revenue and impacting, but at the same time try not to detract him from other jobs and stuff too. So it's nothing formal, but it's just been kind of a process that as he goes along and he's got this hunger, he's like, hey, what can I do next to better myself? And it's like, hey, cite some of these resources in your time. If you have questions, hit me up. And we'll take some of our break time there at work to go over some of his code.
Yeah, I find that working in an office where there's a culture of imparting knowledge upon other people within your office is usually the way to find people who want to stick around the longest. And certainly it ends up being the people who are more qualified. If you find an individual who's resistant to learning that kind of new skill, oftentimes there may not be a good fit to an environment where people look at mentoring and coaching on a pretty serious level and are trying to, as Clay was saying, or Bob, sorry, not Clay, Bob, as Bob was saying, getting rid of some of that risk. And I think those kinds of tools are great ways to carefully and slowly get rid of risk within your office, as well as kind of build up that kind of character that you're looking for, make your employees better at their jobs. And it certainly comes with a new risk if you raise them up and at some point they fly the coop. But the alternative is having a whole bunch of stick in the mud.
Well, I think in our industry you can't be resistant to learning new things from anybody. Whether they're 22 or 52. If they're the expert. That's one thing I loved about when I got to Cisco. I came out of Boeing, which did not have a really aggressive formal mentoring program, especially for technical people. They had mentoring for management, which I was a part of at one point, but not for technical people. But when I entered Cisco, you walk into a room and the smartest guy in the room was the guy you listened to, whether he was 24 or 54. It didn't matter. If he had the most knowledge about that topic, then you listen to what he said. When I left in 2008, it was who had the highest title in the room is who was listened to. But we went from 3,500 people to 67,000 people over that tenure. And so it's culture changes. And so you got to find where you fit. And what I try to create with my teams is a culture of always learning, always sharing, and I always try and pair my junior people with my senior people on projects. As well as cross-training and skill set, and that's part of their evaluation process, is they're learning how to do something new. Because it keeps them engaged, it keeps them sharp, it keeps them interested. Because we do the same thing, stamping widgets out day after day. I don't know, but most people, they can't do it, they get bored.
They've actually, and if you're pairing people, from a real technical point of view, they've actually shown that if you pair a very senior person with a junior person for pair programming, they actually produce better code than them separately would have. Because the senior person tends to make assumptions and make mistakes, the younger person doesn't, and then they actually do, there's actually a cross-training, not even a mentoring that goes on a lot of times. And I'll say, like, as a coach, someone who comes in from the outside, not being the manager, you can be like, more encouragement, we'll say. I've struggled with sometimes getting groups to code together, and maybe it's to your point that the people that are more resistant to that, it's either a fear or I don't need someone to check my code, but it's just amazing how differently the environments feel when you go in, and the people, overnight I saw a team get a new development lead, and he goes, hey, we're going to try out pair programming, and now they don't want to do anything but I also have met groups where it's like, that's not our culture, but I think that there's something else going there that's giving them that learning. And there's, I think, your point, there's something about that, you're not here just to do the original job I hired you to do. Like, you're here because you have a creative and technical mind, not because you know Java or something. And, how do you, as a manager, a leader, continue to create that culture, not just the culture of, we're here to get the job done or just have quality, or, it's the checklist versus the hard part, right? The hard part is I want you to be doing something, I want your job to look different in 3 months or 6 months, because we as a company have to have changed. And if you haven't been a part of that, and you're just doing the same job with the same technical skill, or you haven't helped someone else grow, then, like, what the heck?
We're not progressing.
Yeah.
The dilemma that, like I have now, is that we're a fairly small team with a very finite budget. And I have to get a certain amount of output out just to make sure we're generating the cash flow that we need to be generating. So if I take 2 people and put them on something that one person can actually do, maybe they'll get it done in 70% of the time, but I've burned 200% of resource. So I have to weigh that. So I try and manage the code reviews and the design process versus sitting side by side. And we just had a situation where we didn't do enough code review and process. And so we're at the end fixing a couple of things.
But do you think if they had paired, that code review and process would have been necessary?
It still would have been necessary from a full team perspective, because, I need to know that end result. But it wouldn't have been as lengthy, and I don't think we would have had the issue. Of course, they might have killed each other. But,
well, no, I wonder, honestly, I haven't coded in a long time, so that's where this is an inquiry, an honest inquiry, not loaded questions or anything. But,
never.
Yes, never. That there's not a right answer. But, I've been wondering lately, I run into a lot of groups that, have started using Scrum or Agile or Kanban, and what happens is that sometimes there's often still a process inside there, which does include that, we talk about the design, how we build it, and then we develop it, and then we code review it, and then we make some changes, and then we finally test it and make unit tests, and then we ship it. And then I'm like, well, why don't you try some pairing? What would happen? Why do you do those code reviews? Why did those happen? Why at some point when you were in ad hoc nature did you start adding in these process elements? And, if you ask, it's almost like the 5 whys to your process. It's back to, well, I needed to provide quality code. I was like, okay, well, if you told the team it's your responsibility to provide quality code, so you're already having to fix it in the back end anyway, how would you have done it differently? Because, and I'm pontificating a little bit, but sometimes I see code reviews are almost that, well, you reviewed my code, so now I can blame it on you that you didn't catch something that I did, right? It's almost like that, the old-fashioned sign-off. Code reviews almost become this old-fashioned sign-off where doing a pair programming of some sort is actually creating co-responsibility. And I don't know, I don't want to mean to generalize completely, but I've been racking my brain a little bit that even within the Agile and communities and Kanban, stuff like that, we are going significantly faster. But sometimes I think we still miss, Woody he's been kind of speaking on this multiple times, how do you make it wonderful? What if you didn't do code reviews anymore? How would you get that level of quality again? Right? If you were to...
Well, it depends on the team's engagement. In my experience, it's been from the get-go, right? So if you have a team that's tightly working together and you're meshing your code regularly, you don't really have to do a code review at the end because you've looked at it all the way through.
Well, maybe...
And I've had teams like that.
And maybe that's the question. It's what would you have to do? What would the team have to be or do to not have to do that process step anymore?
They're intimately engaged all the way through from soup to nuts, and you can't do that with really large teams. It's been my experience with lots of diverse modules. There has to be some system review anyway.
Yeah.
The level of code review in terms of, because I've worked on some really massive systems, and of course we've done little single programmer projects. But when the programs are sitting side by side and they're sharing with each other, like people that have been programming together or working on projects together for a long period of time, they know how each other write their code, they know how they think, so they can glance at something and know kind of how the logic's going to flow. They sort of, it's weird how cause it's like finishing someone else's sentence. Someone that I've done a lot of work with, I know how they're going to do something, because we teach each other. And if you've been coding with someone for 5 years, you kind of know that. And so, do you need to pair them, or can they sit next to each other working on different things, but they're sharing back and forth?
Yeah, so you're talking like the system integration level. I mean, it's just interesting. I'm trying to think it through too, because I'm challenged too. You know, how do you? There's got to be better ways, right? I feel like sometimes we fall back on, you know, the +1s. I have a lot of people I know that use Jira, and it's like you send out the code review ticket, and then if you get all your +1s, you're allowed to move forward, right? And it's kind of like, ew, you know, it doesn't feel good.
I think that might work for some teams that are highly meshed, as you're saying. If really everybody is on so much of a same page, and you have highly talented and capable and professional programmers, I can see that working. I think most teams aren't at that level. And so at that point, you're saying, what can we tack on to try to get to the same results that those really highly capable teams have? And then you're tacking on so many things, and there is kind of the question of, why don't you just build it in? And, you know.
Well, I think to your point, I was saying is like how many safeguards are we putting in place because underlying it all, we just don't have the right like practices or culture. Maybe sometimes I fear like, and I don't know why, and I'm bashing it. I mean, it can be any process step, but it's those sign-offs, those little things. It's our little risk things, like, you know, eking themselves in from just traditional process again, because it makes us feel a little bit better. But was that, you know, the right way to build it in? And I don't know what the right answer is to that, you know, and to your point, I just, sometimes I'm afraid it's the easy answer is those traditional things like code review, but just are they really doing it? Are people really engaged? What happens when someone doesn't do it well? Like, did you really need to ask 10 people to take an hour, you know, to read through the code when there could have been some other arrangement? You know, it's all those things.
Well,
you know,
too, it's what does code review mean? Are you actually reading line by line? Because I never did that. I mean, we did, sometimes we'd step into actually line by line code, especially if it was a complex piece of logic.
Yeah.
But usually it's more of a review of module and system, and not stepping into the inside of every method. So it depends on what level of code review you're doing.
And why.
And why, right, exactly. If you have breakage, then you're going line by line.
I think that's precisely why you can't compare the Jira ticket code review process with pair programming very easily. It's apples and oranges. And I heard you say, well, I get, you know, it happens 70% of the time, right? So I'm getting a 30% reduction in speed, but I'm spending 200% of the resources. But what's the other missing metric? You know, the question of what's our bug rate? What's our defect rate, I guess is the new word in the industry. And what is the speed at which our velocity decreases over time because of the complexity of our software, right? If you're writing code that's really, really tight and that's, you know, got the good architecture, in theory, you can go forever. And you never run into the problem of, oh, you want this feature, I can't add it because my code is too brittle to accept that new feature. And I do find that you're more likely to get to that level of kind of nirvana through pair programming, but yeah, you do have to balance it. Like, how much of that risk do you need to mitigate?
I had teams building a single product, but I had teams in Dallas and Raleigh and Lausanne, Switzerland, and one team in France, and then my team in California, and we're putting out one product, but there was a lot of pieces that made up that product, and coming from different places, and sometimes, well, that one we didn't have an acquisition, but I've done that with an acquisition as well. And you bind all that together, and you have to create a shipping working solution. And it's multiple pieces of code per se, or multiple products that come together to create a system of working solution, usually in a piece of hardware. So you put all those moving parts together, and then, you know, managing that has to start at a very high level in design and architecture, that flows down into those individual implementation pieces. And that's where I struggle sometimes from an Agile, it's the question I asked you, right? When you're trying to do that level of integration and still keep everything fast and rapid, becomes somewhat difficult in managing. You have to depend on your lower level managers managing those sprints that are feeding back up a level. That means all your architecture has to work in between to make sure those diverse pieces work together.
Well, and I think that that's like more running issues. That actually has nothing to do with Agile. That's infrastructure. And the companies that I work with that become the fastest, it's the ones that say we have to invest in a team, and their only job is to make us like technically go faster. Whether that's, no one starts a company where they're able to, like when you start growing, right? It's integration. How often do they put their code together? Like, isn't it? It's Netflix that they couldn't get their programmers to integrate enough, and so they started. One day the managers came up with a fun idea to like accidentally crash the system, and it created such a like buzz that then all of a sudden there was so much. They essentially like forcefully put pain into the system so that they would fix the underlying like technological.
They're crash monkey, right?
Yes, the crash monkey,
Yeah.
and I was just like, wow, like that. Talk about thinking out of the box, and then something. Could you imagine this manager going, "We're totally going to break our system just to
intentionally
make the
break
point."
our production system.
To make the point, and I think that's. I think sometimes, and again, it kind of a question on to you guys. Sometimes I think people want Agile to fix technological problems, and as a coach, it becomes challenging because I have development teams going, but Aaron, you don't understand. We have to integrate it. And I'm like, well, then build a system that can integrate every hour. And they're like, it's impossible. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure it's impossible because I read about it all the time. You just don't want to spend the money or the time on it right now, which is okay too. But make that decision and then know what your limitations are based on that. So for you, if you're like, right now, I have to make the decision that I have to put these two people here and I can't put them together because I don't have the other infrastructure. It's like, right now I'm using some duct tape and I can't be surprised when I pay for it later or something, and I think most companies unfortunately do, they hit a real pain point when they decide to build a DevOps team or whatever you want to call it. But I don't know. I obviously have less in that technical background, but people are like, well, I can't go faster, and it tends to not be team cultural stuff a lot of times, or the frustration, if you really ask the whys, are more of we don't value putting time into improving that system that has no payback to our current short-term payback. It's that long-term investment, right? Those are all long-term investment projects. And boy, frankly, they pay off when I see the companies commit to them. But I'll be honest with you, every time I see a company commit to making those investments, it's painful. Like I can see them going through like physical pain to put their resources and their money there to build teams, essentially a team that produces no revenue. But yet all of a sudden they want to go faster and faster and faster, and they have a team that's actually pretty darn close all of a sudden. They're like, wow, we're sure glad we did that, But I think, there's Agile solves certain problems and it doesn't serve other problems. But
I think one of the things that's interesting about how Agile comes in, and people run into issues where they butt up against it, like, I thought this was going to solve all my problems. Why are my problems not solved? Instead, I'm running into even more problems. And a lot of times, it's that Agile exposes the underlying issues. I had a guy the other day asking me at work during a coaching session, and he was saying, but how can Agile come in and make it so that our requirements are better and I don't have to put in tickets and the people who represent our stakeholders do a better job of giving us feedback? And all I could tell him was, well, there's some processes that you can kind of create an environment for that to happen, but if people don't come into the process and partake in it, all that this has done is shown you that so-and-so isn't in the room with a voice, even though you need them there. And it's kind of up to us to go and reach out and make those relationships so that the right people are in the room. And it's by no means a silver bullet.
Well, Agile will not fix poor skills or bad attitude.
That's very true.
It won't. So changing the process doesn't fix that problem. It's a different kind of problem.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two particular attitudes that I see a lot of times in developers especially. You get sometimes the cockiness where I know how to do this. Yeah, I don't need to work closely with the team. I don't need a client to tell me how to do this. I don't need to have this clear vision. I don't need to adapt because there might be a better solution. So there's that aspect. And then I think one thing we forget about a lot of times is the imposter syndrome, where programmers, they might be a totally capable programmer, but they're convinced that everybody in the room is better than them, and that if anybody saw the work that they produced, they'd realize that that person was an imposter. And so, like, pair programming and code reviews are where that comes in, where you'll find individuals who don't want their code to go public to get feedback, which is critical to their survival and the company's survival. So you got to be really careful to kind of build that culture where it is acceptable and to learn, get help, to be productive and have constructive criticism and to take it. And sometimes that even involves training people in how to accept criticism.
So I was curious, your topic was coaching and managers. So I'm just trying to bring us back around, but like, what is the mesh there? What drew people to that?
That's a good question.
Like 2 weeks ago, I was moved into a management position at the university.
Okay.
And so I've been sort of leading this team for a long time, but now it's official and announced and whatnot. So I just wanted to come and hear and listen and try to, being in management at the university here is, people get stuck in it and they get stuck in the rut and they don't ever leave. And you see these people that have worked at the university for 35 years and just like suck the life out of everything. So just trying to fix that and not become that.
Are there some people that didn't get sucked and been there a long time?
There are some.
Do you both exist?
I don't know.
Yeah, for me, I'm under Bobby there at work, so it's kind of fun.
Report.
I report to Bobby. But also,
He does not look down on you. You are not under him.
Exactly.
try telling him that.
Come on. I'm kidding.
It's all out of love.
Yeah, I know. Same here. But before Bobby came along, and even while he's still there, it's like I work closely with other people and do some training, and I also have a team, third party that we integrate with that I pretty much manage that part of it. So that's where we're trying to figure out better techniques and stuff that we can use to just help keep everybody engaged, and also, like I said, since I report to Bobby, just trying to figure out how being a team member can be more effective to make things easier for him. Because the goal is to make our managers look better. Ultimately, I mean, this is what you do.
I guess I've came from a few different environments, and I've had the fortune of having pretty good managers, except for one, but I'm not going to go there. And what I see the managers more doing for the ones that have been better is they've been more stand back and just let you do whatever you want, and that's been working out really well for them in the past, and they seem better at motivating rather than actually managing people, at least in my eyes.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to make it like a round circle.
Well, I guess I'm in a role now where I'm going to start managing students a little more. That's kind of self-imposed, but so be it. I also have a new boss, kind of, sort of. He's all right, I guess. But, in the last in the last 2 weeks or so, I've been put on a new project where I've been micromanaged up the wazoo, and it's really irritating. So I'm glad that the new boss isn't quite like that, which is nice. But yeah, I just kind of drifted in. So, you're up.
That's what it's about. Well, I know Nick and Dan from past interactions, and wanted to sit in on Dan's session for one reason, but the other is I've been fortunate to have a lot of different exposure to a lot of different environments through my career and managing different kinds of teams. moving from engineering to marketing to product development to business development. And just wanted to share what little knowledge I may have gained and maybe gain some new knowledge.
Cool. I just have to answer my own question, huh? Honestly, lately I've been seeing a lot of developers become managers lately, and obviously you see that in like startups or any sort of tech companies, and what I see makes me sad. Just for the amount of support that they get to make that transition from an expert role, which is what either an expert in their code and craft, into a manager. And even honestly, even appreciating the difference between what a manager is and a leader is. Because I think leaders, like, I want to be the leader, and it's like, yeah, but you're a manager, and there's actually a difference in some cases. Like, everyone can be a leader, but as a manager, what does that mean? And I've just seen a lot of, I guess, all-size companies, less immature big ones, and, obviously because they start having the resources to mentor people. But
they have classes for their managers.
Yes, exactly. But we can pontificate on that too. But just how often, even people are kind of put in those roles, I call them, battlefield promotions, where then it's like, because I need you in there, I need someone there because I need someone to deal with, there's too many people now reporting to me. And then that person goes off and does it the way they think it should be done. And, it's like we treat this the most important role, and the more and more I see about, like, why do people leave their jobs? Like, we hear these metrics, like, 80 ridiculous number % of people leave their jobs because of their manager, and I know that's true because I've experienced it. I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced it. It doesn't matter your age, like, and yet then when we're given that role, and I'll put it on both sides, when we give someone that role and when we take that role, we don't stop to try to figure out what does it mean for us to be the best in that job. But we would do that in a technical role, and
it's a different set of skills.
Well, it is, and I say I met a VP once of marketing, and it was the best team I have ever seen to this day. Like, culture-wise, just amazing. And I asked the guy, pretty young guy, and I was like, how did this happen? And he goes, well, when I became a manager, or a VP, I went out and I made it my job to figure out how do I be the best at that. I didn't go how to become the best at doing my marketing or make my product go out, like all of what those business needs. He said, my job is to be the manager of this group of people. What does that mean to be a great manager? So he went out and self-taught himself just like anyone would put themselves through a class through Ruby. And that's just does not come across. Like, when you're a manager, it's like the title, you get granted the title, and but with that does not come like, oh, I need to now go and learn the skill set. Honestly, unless you're at like a Cisco or a Ball or someone where they actually understand that that's how they keep people, because they can see that turnover. So anyway, that was a really long answer, because I'm struggling with what I'm seeing going on in the industry, and that all these great startups start, and I have a great fear around that people that start as great engineers do not always great managers make, but it doesn't mean they couldn't be, but they're just not. And we're losing a great opportunity to...
We've had lots of conversations about that over the last decade in terms of career paths, because most people move into management because you reach a ceiling. Yeah. And I want to continue to grow and increase my salary and have more opportunity, and how do you do that? Well, then you move up and you start managing people. Doesn't mean that your personality is right for management. It's not about aptitude. It's really about a set of skills, and more people skills, soft skills, than anything else. And then it's do you want to be a manager in terms, because it's a lot about schedules and time management and budget, and it's not near as much fun as building stuff. It's a lot more fun to build stuff. So that's a conversation I've had with people that reported to me that were interested in career tracking. Well, anyone that has a competent attitude, if you're a competent technical person, senior in your field, you have the aptitude to be a manager, for sure. But do you have the personality skills? Can you work with people? Can you deal with conflict? 50% of your management time will be spent in dealing with personnel issues. Part of that's budget, but a great part of that is just, Sally and John just can't work together. Or John and Bill are going to kill each other. Or John's going to kill a marketing guy. Oh no, he's got the PM up against the wall. This is bad. those are the things you deal with every day. And is that something you can or want to do? So, I mentor a lot and coach a lot. Just, it's sort of part of my personality, I guess. I've been doing it for a long time. That's why I've got involved with startups. A few years ago, I did the America Startup Weekend stuff. It's just, I like working with young companies. I like working with smart people. And larger companies move much, much more slowly. And there's reasons for that. And I understand, having grown up there per se. At the same time, though, they don't have to move as slow as they often do.
No, but then to that point is I think there's something there about, that there's a different management skill set that the young companies could learn from the older companies. Because the older companies have figured out that that is a different skill set, and we do put money and programs behind that, and sometimes it's like, well, I was a smart programmer, so I should, be a smart manager too. That's, I don't know. It's one of those, when you're a kid, you don't think you learn anything from your parents, but sometimes I wonder, well, it's okay to look and see what they do well. And there are some companies that, create great leaders. It's okay to say, it doesn't mean that I would want to work for them, but, right?
Well, yeah, when you're 18, you think your parents are idiots, and when you're 28, you realize, they were kind of smart.
Like,
they were right.
Oh, we just reinvented an HR program that,
Well, but a young company can't take the same approach that a larger company with a lot of budget can.
No.
And also, they can't take the same time. A larger company can take a risk and blow $100 million on a program that fails. Startups can't do that. I used to get so frustrated with Cisco because they'd go buy a company for $300 million, and I knew we could build it for 20.
Well, but what about investing in, if you're a manager, you have a business coach that you speak with, once a month. I don't even see people do that. It's like, I want you, or just an expectation of, once a week, just like the engineers have to deliver learning about the product, I'd like you to learn, one new management, technique that you've learned. Like, go listen to a podcast about, go listen to manager tools or something.
I think there's a problem with the battlefield promotions you mentioned. Yeah, I love that term. That really, it encapsulates what's going on sometimes. And we've got engineers who are top of their field, and we say, wow, you're a great engineer. You're the senior lead on the team. Therefore, you should be the manager. And what does that tell the person who's a manager? You know how to solve this problem better than anybody else on the team. Therefore, take your knowledge and make everybody else do that. And that doesn't work from a people perspective, right? The whole aspect of trust your team is really, really critical, and you're just going to breed unhappy teams. And you're probably going to breed an unhappy manager because they're going to say, I'm telling them exactly how to do it, but they're not doing it, they're not happy, and why is my team awful? And what we really have to do instead is switch from that management perspective and start thinking as a coach. Say, I have a lot of background information, how can I ask my team the questions where they can arrive at an answer that's a better answer than what they know without thinking about those questions?
Better answer than I have.
Yeah, ideally.
I always want to hire people that are smarter than I am.
Well, and that's going back to switching the mentality between having been the expert to being that, and there actually is, there's a book called Leadership Agility, and they have a 3-level about leadership, and I forget what the middle one is, but essentially the first one is you start as an expert in your field. And it's the VP said the same thing to me. He was like, yeah, I could go design a logo, I could go set up a newsletter, like he knows how to do those things, I could cut the video, whatever. He goes, but I'm not the best one to do it. I hired the best one to do it, or I train, or I mentored the best person to do it. He will pitch in. He was kind of like the extra. He was the the pinch hitter or whatever. But he at one time he was probably the expert at one of those things. But it's I don't. The interesting thing about him is he was not meant. He made the decision or figured that out on his own, which was amazing, obviously, for what I see. But it's like, how, for someone who's gotten all of their value, think that person's been there, been working as a programmer, say, for 10 years, it could even be 5 years, like 10 years, and all their value from their business, all of the appreciation they've got is about being an expert. And then you ask them to be a manager, but you don't help them shift their thinking in any way. Like, what do you expect to happen? Like, really, what do you expect to happen?
Reflecting upon my own journey,
Yeah.
right? I was a developer, and then I became a manager. And if that was the transition, it probably would have been better, except it wasn't that cut and dry. Instead it was, okay, so now you're a developer, and now you're going to be a developer manager, right? So I've been given kind of these dual responsibilities. And as a producer of things, it forces me to think in a particular way that's not conducive to helping other producers of things.
Looking at the code and the way you would have done it.
Yeah, it's because I'm involved in the code, I can't take the 30,000 foot overview to help other people see things in the code. Because my hands are in there, I'm the wrong person to help guide the discussion.
You still could do it yourself.
Yeah, I can. And sometimes I do. And it's a pitfall that I try to avoid. Someone at some point said, you can't both be a manager and a producer. And I'm in that position. I can totally see where that's the wrong way to do it. Yeah, and startups are special environments, I think.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm a working manager. I'm a developer. I've been a developer for 10 years, and now I'm moving into this management role. And so that's, I really want to, I'm trying to get better at being in that management. I know I am an expert in my field. I don't know if you guys watched that video that went around Facebook the other day where that dude is sitting in the thing, and then the lady says, we want seven lines.
Yes!
I love that.
7 perpendicular lines, 3 drawn with red ink, and the rest drawn with transparent.
Yeah, I saw
Yeah,
that.
well,
It was so
I mean,
cool.
I've sat in meetings and I've been that guy, and I've been like, you can't, this is not a thing that you can do. Oh, come on, now it's,
You're an expert.
Right, and it's funny because I've started sort of like jokingly telling people in meetings, we can do anything. I've been saying this for like a year. And at the end of that...
And it makes me nervous every time you say it,
yeah,
just so you know.
Kayla can attest to this. Like, people will say, can we do it? I'm like, well, I can do anything. You give me the time and the resources.
That's the right answer.
I could do
That's
anything
the right
for you,
answer.
but you probably aren't willing to give me the time and the resources. It was really funny at the end of that video when that dude's like, I'm an expert. I can do anything.
Yeah, I think we run into the problem a lot of times in our organizations where it's the manager that goes to the pre-planning meetings and the manager speaks to what the team can deliver, and then you pull in the team and the team's like, what? What did you promise?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's
And
classic.
we just need to bring the team in to speak for themselves.
Well, a good manager brings the requirements back, circles his team. So this is what I think we can do, and do the feasibility, right? You get the experts to tell you, is it feasible? And then you go back and make the hard commitment. So it's like, I think that may be possible. Let me sit down with my team and we'll whiteboard this out. And I'll meet with you next Wednesday or tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we'll give you, I'll have some feedback as to what we think a timeline might look like and how feasible this idea is. It's a young manager that will, oh, absolutely, we can do that. We can do it by next Thursday. And he goes back and his programmers look at him and go, nope.
You might be able to, but we're going to go home.
So that's part of maturity too, and learning, and that's a big part of management, is because your management team is typically part of another piece of an organization or a larger organization, and you have clients either internally or externally that you're working with, whether it's marketing or engineering or DevOps, and it's as you've been in the job for a while, you learn not to make commitments you can't fill, and not to overcommit your team, or at the same time not to underestimate your team. And typically, I always try and stretch my team, not externally but internally. So I never make commitments that I don't think we can meet. At the same time, though, I push them to drive to learn new things and to stretch themselves. And it's, well, like Justin tell you, I always try and do the 80-20. Give me your 80% confidence factor on this. And don't fudge it. Tell me what you really, with an 80% confidence, can you do this in 4 weeks? No, 8 weeks. Okay, so we got to look at the requirements, change the backlog. 6 weeks. Add another person.
10 weeks.
3 people then. Yeah, double estimate. But as a manager, you learn to ebb and flow with it, and it really is a different set of skills. And to a certain extent, at the same time, I use my technical brain all the time in terms of that analysis and problem-solving process. I was talking with Kevin this morning about calculus. Is calculus required in the CS curriculum? Because I feel that's where I really learned how to solve problems, was working math. All the hundreds of hours in the library working math. I feel that, that gave me an appreciation of A, being stubborn and not giving up, but B, how to look at things many different ways. And so, as a manager, you're always technically problem solving with the resources that you have. And I've worked on many different kinds of technology, many different kinds of systems with different teams in different places. So I've solved, I wouldn't say the same problem, but similar problems, very different ways based on the resources that were at hand. It's like, which language do you use? Okay, I got a Java programmer. We'll probably use Java. You know, I got a C# programmer. Yeah, okay, well, if we have to. You know, it depends on what the resources are and what you bring to bear. And that's every environment I've ever been in. And the startups are really interesting because you're limited to typically on budget and skill set that's accessible, because you can't just go and buy it. At Cisco, it's great. If I needed something, all I had to do was get the budget for it. I could buy anything we needed as long as I could validate that it was a viable product and there was revenue and cash flow. When you're dealing with a smaller company, it's more challenging because you can't buy your way out of a problem. And sometimes even then you couldn't. You were going to concede a market. And I've seen some very large companies have done that. They conceded markets after massive investments. But as a startup, you do that, you're out of business. So,
You know, another dynamic I've seen with Agile or startups or in managers that I've also been pontificating on, or thinking on, because I've seen it done well, but it's just so rare, is that there's something magical that happens when somebody gets the term manager in their title. It's the day when, like, we were friends, but now we're not really friends, right? I mean, there's something that happens there. Like, whether we like it or not, like, it's a weird, like, built-in genetic response to when someone becomes a manager.
Well, it's two directions too, because you were my lead. Now you control my bonus and my raise.
Well, and so to that point, if you really, like, step back and, like, okay, everyone plays a role in a business because there's something to be done there and I need them there. So if you're a manager and I'm staying in, like, the technical world, it's because you're filling a certain business need so I can keep doing this job. But you're allowed to hold me accountable, but it's so rare when I see it go the other way.
That's true.
But why doesn't it? You know, that I think is, like, a developer, you have a really empowered team. That it's like, Dan, if you could do this a little bit differently, it would help me, you know, get this job done a lot faster. Or can you go spread this message because it's not getting spread? Can you get better at that? Absolutely. And actually, Jürgen Appello, he wrote Management 3.0, which essentially is like an Agile management book, if you haven't read it. And that was one of his big things, was he was like, I think the first thing in his book is like, I was a really crappy manager for 30 years or something. And then I discovered how to be a good one, an Agile manager. And one of his big things was sitting down at a table and convincing his team to give him feedback. And how hard it was. One, because he didn't really have to do it, and as a manager, it's like we get a free pass, right? We don't.
Cisco used to force 360s, so you had to go back.
But this wasn't, he actually did it in person. So what he was trying to do was build the culture that I wanted to convince them that they needed to give me feedback and to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that even though that management was more about a role he played, not like over him. Does that mean, like, he was another person in the team? Like, why, if you're all sitting at the table, why is the manager more important than the rest of the people at that table? But we treat him that way. We actually, like, the team actually does that for him. It's not like he does it to himself. I'm sure, we raise to that occasion too. It's the ladder. Like, we always say it, like, it's the ladder up. It's the career path. But it's like, no, they're playing a different role in the business, and it looks different and it feels different. But, at what point did it mean you were up, right, or low?
Well, I guess from two sides. One is who's held accountable if the team fails? Who gets fired? It's not the team. It's not the team. Even if the manager did everything right and the team told him incorrectly, or I actually had a case where a manager was falsifying what he was working on to me. So I had a whole team of programmers building something for somebody else, but I was covering the budget for it. And it was approved by my boss, and I didn't know it. I left that organization because I'm not going to work in that kind of an environment.
But see, I think it doesn't have to be set up that way, because I'd also be holding up that guy, accountable if he had someone on this team that was creating a bad dynamic. I actually just had that situation where there was such a toxic player in the team, and essentially the team went to the manager and they're like, he was actually being protected by somebody, like, at a level up, and it was like, hey, we need you to go and do this for us, and he did, and it was great because it you know, that's one of those few times where I've seen the team go like, you're not firing this guy and we need you to. Like, I'm sorry, like he needs to go or you need to move in. And it's, you know, it's that level. I think it's a relationship that you can create. And I think also, like, if your boss was like, I'm gonna hold you accountable for having an empowered team, and if I hear anything from them about you not doing that, that's a very different driver than
Well,
you're
that's the
held
whole point
accountable
of the
for the opposite.
360s, right?
Yeah.
And that's because you did it face to face as well as
Yeah.
it got propagated out.
I've also seen, another way I've seen that just from a setup point of view is something called skip levels.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I ran into that once, and honestly, it was at a larger company, and I was just blown away. I was like, I'm meeting with the VP, like, whoa.
Yeah, well, actually, a lot of companies do that.
Yeah.
They,
I wish more people did that.
they do, you know, so you talk with your director or even a VP, and, you know, they just, not exactly at random, I'm not even sure how sometimes it was
Yeah,
chosen.
they
The skip
scheduled
levels
it.
were just scheduled every so often.
Yeah.
You know, you had a, once a quarter or every other quarter, you met with a senior director.
I think we need to go back. Is it time?
Getting close.
Yeah, getting close. One thing that I saw in a leadership training program I did was an interesting activity that I think kind of gets to what you guys are talking about, and it opens up the channels. We got in a kind of a circle or something like that, and we gave each other feedback. In this case, it was something simple, something non-confrontational. It was just, describe your first impression of this person when you met them. And we ran around the circle and did that to everybody. And that was interesting. I mean, we got in the practice of giving some feedback and receiving some feedback. And it's also terrifying, right? So the real point of the exercise was not to give that feedback. The real point of the exercise was for us to reflect on what it was like both giving and receiving the feedback. And that was one of the most eye-opening things I saw during this entire training session. And everybody said the same thing about how they loved to hear the feedback, and how they actually, their favorite feedback to hear was the negative feedback, which is interesting because when you ask the same group of people when they're giving the feedback, what is that like? They say, I'm afraid to give the feedback, and I'm especially afraid to give the negative feedback. So there's this dissonance between those two things. And when a group of people sit through that process and tell each other those stories, and it's totally repeatable, I've seen it happen in multiple groups, they become capable of giving each other feedback because they realize that it's not going to be the end of the world at that point. And then once you start that channel, you just do it continuously. And it's not so hard at that point.
Yeah, so I think even to make it even simpler, as a manager, really here, if you can open up people to make them see that you are comfortable receiving negative feedback, they will completely open up for you. Because that's where the fear is, right? The fear is the receival of, you know, how you will take that. And now we all know that exercise is great, but you know, getting feedback is difficult. But I found that I get so much value from it. I do get value from it. Doesn't mean that receiving it isn't hard, but I will echo that at least that's something I could do, right? I can't change other people, but what I could do is like. And I've actually been amazed where I've had, you know, in coaching, you know, environments, I had people come to me like, you know, I want to give you some feedback, and it's been tough feedback. But then what happens is we redesign our relationship, and it becomes even more amazing than it would have been if that person hadn't said something. And sometimes you're like, oh, I'm just so sorry, and that was so hard. I go, you know what? It makes me feel so great that you value this relationship enough that you would actually go out of your way and put yourself in that uncomfortable situation to give me that feedback. Thank you.
Saying thank you is a
Yeah.
big deal.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what they tell you, feedback is always good.
Thank you.
Well, constructive honesty, right? And that's, you know, that's a key part of being a manager too, is getting people to be honest with you and with each other. And
Don't kick the dog.
yeah, and some people you have to coach. I mean, I'm just, you made me think about coaching I've done, you know, over the years with people that were maybe too brutally honest, and other people who just wouldn't say anything, and then they'd come and burn my ear off because they were so pissed. And it's like, we need to address this. And sometimes you have to engage as a manager and do it, and sometimes you can coach people to handle it without you. And the more they handle it without you, the less they're in your office. That's a good thing.
So we're kind of out of time. Does anybody have one last comment?
Last
for the
word?
amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
Last word.
So, my dad used to say this all the time, and he would say, management is the art of motivation, not the science of control. And I think that
You don't have to say anything else, that's it.
it's good.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. See, there are things we can learn from.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.